I was appalled. This was too bad. And as I raged against the dissolute habits of the man, Sebright entreated me to moderate my voice so as not to be heard in the cabin. Did I expect the man to change his skin? He had been doing the gay bachelor about here all his life, had never suspected he was doing anything particularly scandalous either. He married the old girl out of chivalry, the romantic fat beggar, and never realized what it meant till she came out with him. Sebright went on whispering to me. He loves and honors her more than you may think. That is so, for all your shrugs, Mr. Kemp. It is not so easy to break the old connection as you imagine. Why, the other evening, 2 of his dissolute habits, as you call them, came off with mantillas over their heads, in a boat in company with a male scalawag of sorts, pinching a mandolin, and serenaded the ship for him. We were all in the cabin after supper, and poor Mrs. Williams, with her eyes still red from weeping over you people, says to us, "How sweet and melancholy that sounds," says she. You should have seen the skipper rolling his eyes at me. The perspiration of fright was simply pouring down his face. I rushed on deck, and it took me all my Spanish to stop them from coming aboard. I had to swear by all the saints, and the honor of a caballero, that there was a wife. They went away laughing at last. They did not want to make trouble, they simply had not believed the tale before, thought it was some dodge of his. I could hear their peals of laughter all the way up the harbor. These are the difficulties we have. The old girl must be protected from that sort of eye-opener if I've to forswear my soul. I've been keeping guard over her ever since we arrived here, besides looking out for you people, as long as there was any hope. I was greatly cast down. Perhaps Williams was justified in making concessions to the associates of his former jolly existence to save some outrage to the feelings of his consort. I did not want to criticize his motives, but what about getting him back on board at once? Sebright was biting his lip. The necessity was pressing, he admitted. He had an idea where to find him. But for himself he could not go, that was evident. Neither would I wish him to leave the ship, even for a moment, now Serafina was on board. An unexpected visit from some zealous police understrapper, a momentary want of presence of mind on the part of the timid steward, there was enough to bring about our undoing. Moreover, as he had said, he must remain on guard over the missus. But whom to send? There was not a single boatman about. The harbour was a desert of water and dressed ships, but even the crews of most of them were ashore, on a regular spree of praying, as he expressed it vexedly. As to our own crew, not one of them knew anything more of Spanish than a few terms of abuse perhaps. Their hearts were in the right place, but as to their wits he wouldn't trust a single one of them by himself, no, not an inch away from the ship. How could he send one of them ashore with the wine shops yawning wide on all sides, and not enough lingo to ask for the way? Sure to get drunk, to get lost, to get into trouble in some way, and in the end get picked up by the police. The slightest hitch of that sort would call attention upon the ship, and with O'Brien to draw inferences. He rubbed his head. "I suppose I'll have to go," he grunted. "But I am known, I may be followed, they may wonder why I rushed to fetch my skipper, and yet I feel this is the time, the very time. Between now and 4 o'clock tomorrow morning we have an almost absolute certitude of getting away with you too. This is our chance and your chance." He was lost in perplexity. Then, as if inspired, I cried, "I will go." "The devil," he said, amazed. "Would you?" I rushed at him with arguments. No one would know me. My clothes were all right and clean enough for a feast day. I could slip through the crowds unperceived. The principal thing was to get Serafina out of O'Brien's reach. At the worst, I could always find means to get away from Cuba by myself. There was Mrs. Williams to look after her, and if I missed Williams by some mischance and failed to make my way back to the ship in time, I charged them solemnly not to wait, but sail away at the earliest possible moment. I said much more than this. I was eloquent. I became as if suddenly intoxicated by the nearness of freedom and safety. The thought of being at sea with her in a few hours away from all trouble of mind or heart made my head swim. It seemed to me I should go mad if I was not allowed to go. My limbs tingled with eagerness. I stuttered with excitement. "Well, after all," Sebright mumbled. "I must go in and tell her," I said. "No, don't do that," said that wise young man. "Have you made up your mind?" "Yes, I have," I answered, "but she's reasonable." "Still," he argued, "the old girl is sure to say that nothing of the kind is necessary. The captain told her that he was coming back for tea. What could we say to that? We can't explain the true state of the case, and if you persist in going, it will look like pig-headed folly on your part." He threw his writing desk open for me. "Write to her, write down your arguments, what you have been telling me. It's a fact that the door stands open for a few hours. As to the rest," he pursued with a weary sigh, "I'll do the lying to pass it off with Mrs. Williams." Thus it came about that, with only 2 flimsy bulkheads between us, I wrote my first letter to Serafina, while Sebright went on deck to make arrangements to send me ashore. He was some time away, long enough for me to pour out on paper the exultation of my thought, the confidence of my hope, my desire to have her safe at last with me upon the blue sea. One must seize a propitious moment lest it should slip away and never return, I wrote. I begged her to believe I was acting for the best, and only from my great love, that could not support the thought of her being so near O'Brien, the arch-enemy of our union. There was no separation on the sea. Sebright came in brusquely. "Come along." The American brigantine was berthed by then, close astern of the Lion, and Sebright had the idea of asking her mate to let his boat, it was in the water, put ashore a visitor he had on board. His own were hoisted, he explained, and there were no boatmen plying for hire. His request was granted. I was pulled ashore by 2 American sailors, who never said a word to each other, and evidently took me for a Spaniard. It was an excellent idea. By borrowing the Yankee's boat, the track of my connection with the Lion was covered. The silent seamen landed me, as asked by Sebright, near the battery on the sand, quite clear of the city. I thanked them in Spanish, and traversing a piece of open ground, made a wide circle to enter the town from the land side, to still further cover my tracks. I passed through a sort of squalid suburb of huts, hovels, and Negro shanties. I met very few people, and these mostly old women, looking after the swarms of children of all colours and sizes playing in the dust. Many curs sunned themselves among heaps of rubbish, and took not the trouble to growl at me. Then I came out upon a highroad, and turned my face towards the city lying under a crude sunshine, and in a ring of metallic vibrations. Better houses with plastered fronts washed yellow or blue, and even pinky red, alternated with tumble-down wooden structures. A crenellated squat gateway faced me with a carved shield of stone above the open gloom. A young smooth-faced mulatto in some sort of dirty uniform, but wearing new straw slippers with blue silk rosettes over his naked feet, lounged cross-legged at the door of a kind of guardroom. He held a big cigar tilted up between his teeth, and ogled me like a woman, out of the corners of his languishing eyes. He said not a word. Fortunately my face had tanned to a dark hue. Enrico's clothes would not attract attention to me, of course. The light colour of my hair was concealed by the handkerchief bound under my hat. My footsteps echoed loudly under the vault, and I penetrated into the heart of the city. And directly, it seemed to me, I had stepped back 300 years. I had never seen anything so old. This was the abandoned inheritance of an adventurous race that seemed to have thrown all its might, all its vigour, and all its enthusiasm into one supreme effort of valour and greed. I had read the history of the Spanish conquest, and looking at these great walls of stone, I felt my heart moved by the same wonder and by the same sadness. With what a fury of heroism and faith had this whole people flung itself upon the opulent mystery of the New World. Never had a nation clasped closer to its heart its dream of greatness, of glory, and of romance. There had been a moment in its destiny when it could believe that heaven itself smiled upon its massacres. I walked slowly, awed by the solitude. They had conquered and were no more, and these wrought stones remained to testify gloomily to the death of their success. Heavy houses, immense walls, pointed arches of the doorways, cages of iron bars projecting balcony-wise around each square window, and not a soul in sight, not a head looking out from these dwellings, these houses of men, these ancient abodes of hate, of base rivalries, of avarice, of ambitions, these old nests of love, these witnesses of a great romance now past and gone below the horizon. They seemed to return mournfully my wondering glances. They seemed to look at me and say, "What do you hear? We have seen other men, heard other footsteps." The peace of the cloister brooded over these aged blocks of masonry, stained with the green trails of mosses, infiltrated with shadows. At times the belfry of a church would volley a tremendous crash of bronze into the narrow streets, and between whiles I could hear the faint echoes of far-off chanting, the brassy distant gasps of trombones. A woman in black whisked round a corner, hurrying towards the route of the procession. I took the same direction. From a wine shop, yawning like a dirty cavern in the basement of a palatial old building, issued suddenly a brawny ruffian in rags, wiping his thick beard with the back of a hairy paw. He lurched a little, and began to walk before me hastily. I noticed the glitter of a gold earring in the lobe of his huge ear. His cloak was frayed at the bottom into a perfect fringe, and as he flung it about, he showed a good deal of naked skin under it. His calves were bandaged crosswise, his peaked hat seemed to have been trodden upon in filth before he had put it on his head. Suddenly I stopped short, a Lugareno. We were then in the empty part of a narrow street, whose lower end was packed, close with a crowd viewing the procession which was filing slowly past, along the wide thoroughfare. It was too late for me to go back. Moreover, the ruffian paid no attention to me. It was best to go on. The people, packed between the houses with their backs to us, blocked our way. I had to wait. He took his position near me in the rear of the last rank of the crowd. He must have been inclined to repentance in his cups, because he began to mumble and beat his breast. Other people in the crowd were also beating their breasts. In front of me, I had the facade of a building which, according to the little plan of my route Sebright drew for me, was the Palace of Justice. It had a peristyle of ugly columns at the top of a flight of steps. A cordon of infantry kept the roadway clear. The singing went on without interruption, and I saw tall saints of wood, gilt and painted red and blue, pass, borne shoulder-high, swaying and pitching above the heads of the crowd like the masts of boats in a seaway. Crucifixes were carried, flashing in the sun. An enormous Madonna, which must have weighed half a ton, tottered across my line of sight, dressed up in gold brocade and with a wreath of paper roses on her head. A military band sent a hurricane blast of brasses as it went by. Then all was still at once, except the silvery tinkling of handbells. The people before me fell on their knees together and left me standing up alone. As a matter of fact, I had been caught gaping at the ceremony quite new to me, and had not expected a move of that sort. The ruffian kneeling within a foot of me thumped and bellowed in an ecstasy of piety. As to me, I own I stood there looking with impatience at a passing canopy that seemed all gold, with 3 priests in gorgeous capes walking slowly under it, and I absolutely forgot to take off my hat. The bearded ruffian looked up from the midst of his penitential exercises, and before I realized I was outraging his or anybody else's feelings, leaped up with a yell, "Thou sacrilegious infidel," and sent my hat flying off my head. Just then the band crashed again, the bells pealed out, and no one heard his shout. With one blow of my fist I sent him staggering backwards. The procession had passed, people were rising from their knees and pouring out of the narrow street. Swearing, he fumbled under his cloak. I watched him narrowly, but in a moment he sprang away and lost himself amongst the moving crowd. I picked up my hat. For a time I stood very uneasy and then retreated under a doorway. Nothing happened and I was anxious to get on. It was possible to cross the wide street now. That Lugareno did not know me. He was a Lugareno, though, no doubt about it. I would make a dash now, but first I stole a hasty glance at the plan of my route which I kept in the hollow of my palm. "Senor," said a voice. I lifted my head. An elderly man in black with a white mustache and imperial stood before me. The ruffian was stalking up to his side, and 4 soldiers with an officer were coming behind. I took in the whole disaster at a glance. "The senor is no doubt a foreigner, perhaps an Englishman," said the official in black. He had a lace collar, a chain on his neck, velvet breeches, a well-turned leg in black stockings. His voice was soft. I was so disconcerted that I nodded at him. "The senor is young and inconsiderate. Religious feelings ought to be respected." The official in black was addressing me in sad and measured tones. "This good Catholic," he continued, eyeing the bearded ruffian dubiously, "has made a formal statement to me of your impious demonstration." What a fatal accident, I thought, appalled, but I tried to explain the matter. I expressed regret. The other gazed at me benevolently. "Nevertheless, senor, pray follow me. Even for your own safety, you must give some account of yourself." This I was firmly resolved not to give, but the Lugareno had been going through a pantomime of scrutinizing my person. He crouched up, stepped back, then to one side. "This worthy man," began the official in black, "complains of your violence too." "This worthy man," I shouted stupidly, "is a pirate. He is a Rio Medio Lugareno. He is a criminal." The official seemed astounded, and I saw my idiotic mistake at once, too late. "Strange," he murmured, and at the same time the ruffianly wretch began to shout. "It is he, the traitor, the heretic, I recognize him." "Peace, peace," said the man in black. "I demand to be taken before the Jews Don Patricio for a deposition," shrieked the Lugareno. A crowd was beginning to collect. The official and the officer exchanged consulting glances. At a word from the latter, the soldiers closed upon me. I felt utterly overcome, as if the earth had crumbled under my feet and the heavens had been rent in twain. I walked between my captors across the street amongst hooting knots of people, and up the steps of the portico, as if in a frightful dream. In the gloomy, chilly hall they made me wait. A soldier stood on each side of me, and there, absolutely before my eyes on a little table, reposed Mrs. Williams' shawl and Sebright's cap. This was the very hall of the Palace of Justice of which Sebright had spoken. It was more than ever like an absurd dream now. But I had the leisure to collect my wits. I could not claim the consul's protection simply because I should have to give him a truthful account of myself, and that would mean giving up Seraphina. The consul could not protect her, but the Lion would sail on the morrow. Sebright would understand it if Williams did not. I trusted Sebright's sagacity. Yes, she would sail tomorrow evening. A day and a half. If I could only keep the knowledge of Seraphina from O'Brien till then, she was safe, and I should be safe too, for my lips would be unsealed. I could claim the protection of my consul and proclaim the villainy of the Jews. "Go in there now, Senor, to be confronted with your accuser," said the official in black, appearing before me. He pointed at a small door to the left. My heart was beating steadily. I felt a sort of intrepid resignation. Part 5, The Lot of Man. Chapter 1. "Why have I been brought here, your worships?" I asked with a great deal of firmness. There were 2 figures in black, the one beside the other behind a large black table. I was placed in front of them, between 2 soldiers, in the center of a large, gaunt room with bare, dirty walls and the arms of Spain above the judge's seat. "You are before the Juez de la Primera Instancia," said the man in black beside the table. He wore a large and shadowy tricorn. "Be silent and respect the procedure." It was, without doubt, excellent advice. He whispered some words in the ear of the judge of the first instance. It was plain enough to me that the judge was a quite inferior official, who merely decided whether there were any case against the accused. He had, even to his clerk, an air of timidity, of doubt. I said, "But I insist on knowing." The clerk said, "In good time." And then, in the same tone of disinterested official routine, he spoke to the Lugareno, who, from beside the door, rolled very frightened eyes from the judges and the clerk to myself and the soldiers. "Advance." The judge, in a hurried, perfunctory voice, put questions to the Lugareno. The clerk scratched with a large quill on a sheet of paper. "Where do you come from?" "The town of Rio Medio, Excellency." "Of what occupation?" "Excellency, a few goats." "Why are you here?" "My daughter, Excellency, married Pepe of the Posada in the Cal." The judge said, "Yes, yes," with an unsanguine impatience. The Lugareno's dirty hands jumped nervously on the large rim of his limp hat. "You lodge a complaint against the senor there." The clerk pointed the end of his quill towards me. "I, God forbid, Excellency," the Lugareno bleated. "The alguazil of the criminal court instructed me to be watchful." "You lodge an information then," the Jews said. "Maybe it is an information, Excellency," the Lugareno answered, "as regards the senor there." The alguazil of the criminal court had told him, and many other men of Rio Medio, to be on the watch for me, undoubtedly touching what had happened, as all the world knew in Rio Medio. He looked me full in the face with stupid insolence, and said, "At first I much doubted, for all the world said this man was dead, though others said worse things. Perhaps, who knows?" He had seen me, he said, many times in Rio Medio, outside the casa, on the balcony of the casa too, and he was sure that I was a heretic and an evil person. It suddenly struck me that this man, I was undoubtedly familiar with his face, must be the lieutenant of Manuel del Popolo, his boon companion. Without doubt, he had seen me on the balcony of the casa. He had gained a lot of assurance from the conciliatory manner of the Jews, and said suddenly, in a tentative way, "An evil person, a heretic, who knows? Perhaps it was he who incited some people there to murder his senoria, the illustrious Don." I said almost contemptuously, "Surely the charge against me is most absurd. Everyone knows who I am." The old judge made a gentle, tired motion with his hand. "Senor," he said, "there is no charge against you except that no one knows who you are. You were in a place where very lamentable and inexplicable things happened. You are now in Havana, you have no passport. I beg of you to remain calm. These things are all in order." I hadn't any doubt that, as far as he knew, he was speaking the truth. He was a man very evidently of a weary and naive simplicity. Perhaps it was really true, that I should only have to explain. Perhaps it was all over. O'Brien came into the room with the casual step of an official, from an office entering another's room. It was as if seeing me were a thing that he very much disliked, that he came because he wanted to satisfy himself of my existence, of my identity, and my being alone. The slow stare that he gave me did not mitigate the leisureliness of his entry. He walked behind the table. The judge rose with immense deference. With his eternal smile and no word spoken, he motioned the judge to resume the examination. He stood looking at the clerk's notes meditatively, the smile still round lips that had a nervous tremble, and eyes that had dark marks beneath them. He seemed as if he were still smiling just after having been violently shaken. The judge went on examining the Lugareno. "Do you know whence the senner came?" "Excellency, Excellency," the man stuttered, his eyes on O'Brien's face. "Nor how long he was in the town of Rio Medio," the judge went on. O'Brien suddenly drooped towards his ear. "All those things are known, senner, my colleague," he said, and began to whisper. The old judge showed signs of very naive astonishment and joy. "Is it possible?" he exclaimed. "This man, he is very young to have committed such crimes." The clerk hurriedly left the room. He returned with many papers. O'Brien, leaning over the judge's shoulder, emphasized words with one finger. What new villainies could O'Brien be meditating? It wasn't possibly the Lugareno's suggestion that I had lured men to murder Don Balthazar. Was it merely that I had infringed some law in carrying off Serafina? The old judge said, "How lucky, Don Patricio, we may now satisfy the English admiral. What good fortune." He suddenly sat straight in his chair. O'Brien behind him scrutinized my face, to see how I should bear what was coming. "What is your name?" the judge asked peremptorily. I said Juan John Kemp. "I am of noble English family, I am well enough known," asked the senner O'Brien. On O'Brien's shaken face the smile hardened. "I heard that in Rio Medio the senner was called. He paused and appealed to the Lugareno. "What was he called?" "The capataz, the man who led the picaroons." The Lugareno stammered, Nicola el Escoses, senner Don Patricio." "You hear?" O'Brien asked the judge. "This villager identifies the man." Undoubtedly, the Jews said. "We need no more evidence. You, senner, have seen this villain in Rio Medio. This villager identifies him by name." I said, "This is absurd. 100 witnesses can say that I am John Kemp." "That may be true," the Jews said dryly, and then to his clerk. "Right here, John Kemp, of noble British family, called on the scene of his crimes Nicola el Escoses, otherwise El Demonio." I shrugged my shoulders. I did not at the moment realize to what this all tended. The judge said to the clerk, "Read the act of accusation. Read here." He was pointing to a paragraph of the papers the clerk had brought in. They were the act of accusation, prepared long before against the man Nichols. This particular villainy suddenly became grotesquely and portentously plain. The clerk read an appalling catalogue of sordid crimes, working into each other like kneaded dough, the testimony of witnesses who had signed the record. Nicola had looted 14 ships, and had apparently murdered 22 people with his own hand, 2 of them women, and there was the affair of Rowley's boats. The pinnace, the clerk read, of the British came within 10 yards. The said Nicola then exclaimed, cursed the bloodthirsty hounds, and fired the grape shot into the boat. 7 were killed by that discharge. This I saw with my own eyes. Signed, Isidoro Alemano. And another swore the said Nicola was below, but he came running up, and with one blow of his knife severed the throat of the man who was kneeling on the deck. There was no doubt that Nicola had committed these crimes, that the witnesses had sworn to them and signed the deposition. The old judge had evidently never seen him, and now O'Brien and the Lugareno had sworn that I was Nicola el Escoses, alias El Demonio. My first impulse was to shout with rage, but I checked it because I knew I should be silenced. I said, "I am not Nicola el Escoses, that I can easily prove." The judge of the first instance shrugged his shoulders and looked with implicit trust up into O'Brien's face. "That man," I pointed at the Lugareno, "is a pirate. And what is more, he is in the pay of the Senner Jews O'Brien. He was the lieutenant of a man called Manuel del Popolo, who commanded the Lugarenos after Nicola left Rio Medio." "You know very much about the pirates," the Jews said, with the sardonic air of a very stupid man. "Without doubt you were intimate with them. I sign now your order for committal to the castle of the Marine Court." I said, "But I tell you I am not Nicola." The Jews said impassively, "You pass out of my hands into those of the Marine Court. I am satisfied that you are a person deserving of a trial. That is the limit of my responsibility." I shouted then, "But I tell you this O'Brien is my personal enemy." The old man smiled acidly. "The Senner need fear nothing of our courts. He will be handed over to his own countrymen. Without doubt of them he will obtain justice." He signed to the Lugareno to go, and rose, gathering up his papers. He bowed to O'Brien. "I leave the criminal at the disposal of your worship," he said, and went out with his clerk. O'Brien sent out the 2 soldiers after him and stood there alone. He had never been so near his death, but for sheer curiosity, for my sheer desire to know what he could say, I would have smashed in his brains with the clerk's stool. I was going to do it. I made 1 step towards the stool. Then I saw that he was crying. The curse of Cromwell on you," he sobbed suddenly. "You send me back to hell again." He writhed his whole body. "Sorrow," he said, "I know it, but what's this? The many reasons he had for sorrow flashed on me like a procession of sombre images. "Dead and done with a man can bear," he muttered. "But this not to know, perhaps alive, perhaps hidden she may be dead." With a change like a flash he was commanding me. "Tell me how you escaped." I had a vague inspiration of the truth. "You aren't fit for a decent man speaking to," I said. "You let her drown." It gave me suddenly the measure of his ignorance. He did not know anything, nothing. His hell was uncertainty. Well, let him stay there. "Where is she?" he said. "Where is she?" "Where she's no need to fear you," I answered. He had a sudden convulsive gesture, as if searching for a weapon. "If you'll tell me she's alive," he began. "Oh, I'm not dead," I answered. "Never a drowned puppy was more," he said with a flash of vivacity. "You hang here for murder or in England for piracy." "Then I've little to want to live for," I sneered at him. "You let her drown," he said. "You took her from that house, a young girl in a little boat, and you can hold up your head." "I was trying to save her from you," I answered. "By God," he said, "these English, I've seen them spit the child on the mother's breast. I've seen them set fire to the thatch of the widow and childless. But this, I can save you, I tell you." "You can't make me go through worse than I've borne," I answered. Sorrow and all he might wish on my head, my life was too precious to him till I spoke. I wasn't going to speak. "I'll search every ship in the harbour," he said passionately. "Do," I said, "bring your Lugarenos to the task." Upon the whole, I wasn't much afraid. Unless he got definite evidence he couldn't, in the face of the consul's protests and the presence of the admiral, touch the lion again. He fixed his eyes intently upon me. "You came in the American brigantine," he said. "It's known you landed in her boat." I didn't answer him. It was plain enough that the drogher's arrival had either not been reported to him, or it had been searched in vain. "In her boat," he repeated. "I tell you I know she is not dead. Even you, an Englishman, must have a different face if she were." "I don't at least ask you for life," I said, "to enjoy with her." "She's alive," he said. "Alive, as for where it matters little. I'll search every inch of the island, every road, every hacienda. You don't realize my power." "Then search the bottom of the sea," I shouted. "Let's look at the matter in the right light." He had mastered his grief, his incertitude. He was himself again, and the smile had returned, as if at the moment he forced his features to their natural lines. "Send one of your friars to heaven. You'll never go there yourself to meet her. If you will tell me she's alive, I'll save you." I made a mute, obstinate gesture. "If she's alive and you don't tell me, I can't but find her, and I'll make you know the agonies of suspense, a long way from here." I was silent. "If she's dead and you'll tell me, I'll save you some trouble. If she's dead and you don't, you'll have your own remorse and the rest too." I said, "You're too Irish mysterious for me to understand, but you've a choice of 4 evils for me, choose yourself." He continued with a quivering, taut good humour, "Prove to me she's dead, and I'll let you die sharply and mercifully." "You won't believe," I said, but he took no notice. "I tell you plainly," he smiled. If we find her dear body, and I can't help, but I've men on the watch all along the shores, I'll give you up to your admiral for a pirate. You'll have a long, slow agony of a trial, I know what English justice is, and a disgraceful felon's death." I was thinking that in any case a day or so might be gained, the lion would be gone, they could not touch her while the flagship remained outside. I certainly didn't want to be given up to the admiral. I might explain the mistaken identity. But there was the charge of treason in Jamaica. I said, "I only asked to be given up, but you daren't do it for your own credit. I can show you up." He said, "Make no mistake, if he gets you he'll hang you. He's going home in disgrace. Your whole blundering government will work to hang you." "They know pretty well," I answered, "that there are queer doings in Havana. I promise you I'll clear things up. I know too much." He said with a sudden, intense note of passion, "Only tell me where her grave is, I'll let you go free. You couldn't, you dare not, dastard that you are, go away from where she died, without making sure." Then search all the new graves in the island, I said. I'll tell you nothing, nothing. He came at me again and again, but I never spoke after that. He made all the issues clearer and clearer, his own side involuntarily and all the griefs I had to expect. As for him, he dared not kill me, and he dared not give me up to the Admiral, in his suspense since, for him, I was the only person in the world who knew Seraphina's fate. He dared not let me out of his grip. And all the while he had me, he must keep the Admiral there, waiting for the surrender either of myself or of some other poor devil whom he might palm off as Nicola el Escoses. While the Admiral was there, the Lion was pretty safe from molestation, and she would sail pretty soon. At the same time, except for the momentary sheer joy of tormenting a man whom I couldn't help regarding as a devil, I had more than enough to fear. I had suffered too much, I wanted rest, woman's love slackening off, and here was another endless coil, endless. If it didn't end in a knife in the back, he might keep me for ages in Havana. Or he might get me sent to England, where it would take months, an endless time, to prove merely that I was Nicola el Escoses. I should prove it, but in the meantime what would become of Seraphina? Would she follow me to England? Would she even know that I had gone there? Or would she think me dead and die herself? O'Brien knew nothing, his spies might report 100 uncertainties. He was standing rigidly still now, as if afraid to move for fear of breaking down. He said suddenly, "You came in some ship. You can't deceive me, I shall have them all searched again." I said desperately, "Search and be damned, whatever ships you like." "You cold, pitiless English scoundrel," he shrieked suddenly. The breaking down of his restraint had let him go right into madness. "You have murdered her. You cared nothing, you came from nowhere. A beggarly fool, too stupid to be even an adventurer. A miserable blunderer, coming in blind, coming out blind, and leaving ruin and worse than hell. What good have you done yourself? What could you, what did you see, what did you hope? Sorrow, ruin, death, I am acquainted with them. It is in the blood, 'tis in the tone, in the entrails of us, in our mother's milk. Your accursed land has brought always that on our own dear and sorrowful country. You waste, you ruin, you spoil. What for? Tell me what for, tell me. What did you gain, what will you ever gain? An unending curse. But ye of no souls." He called very loudly, as if with a passionate relief, his voice giving life to an unsuspected, misgiving echo. "Guards, soldiers, you shall be shot now." He was going to cut the knot that way. 2 soldiers pushed the door noisily open, their muskets advanced. He took no notice of them, and they retained an attitude of military stupidity, their eyes upon him. He whispered, "No, not yet." Then he looked at me searchingly, as if he still hoped to get some certainty from my face, some inkling, perhaps some inspiration of what would persuade me to speak. Then he shook his wrists violently, as if in fear of himself. "Take him away," he said. "Away, out of reach of my hands, out of reach of my hands." I was trembling a good deal. When the soldiers entered, I thought I had got to my last minute. But as it was, he had not learnt a thing from me, not a thing, and I did not see where else he could go for information. Chapter 2. The entrance to the common prison of Havana was a sort of lofty tunnel, finished by great, iron-rusted, wooden gates. A civil guard was exhibiting the judge's warrant for my committal to a white-haired man, with a red face and blue eyes, that seemed to look through tumbled bushes of silver eyebrows, the alcade of the prison. He bowed, and rattled 2 farcically large keys. A practicable postern was ajar on the yellow wood of the studded gates. It was as if it afforded a glimpse of the other side of the world. The venerable turnkey, a gnome in a steeple-crowned hat, protruded a blood-red hand backwards in the direction of the postern. "Senor Caballero," he croaked, "I pray you to consider this house your own. My servants are yours." Within was a gravel yard, shut in by portentous lead-white house-sides with black window holes. Under each row of windows was a vast vaulted tunnel, caged with iron bars, for all the world like beasts' dens. It being day, the beasts were out and lounging about the patio. They had an effect of infinite tranquillity, as if they were ladies and gentlemen parading in a Sunday avenue. Perhaps 20 of them, in snowy white shirts and black velvet knee breeches, strutted like pigeons in a knot, some with 1 woman on the arm, some with 2. Bundles of variegated rags lay against the walls as if they were sweepings. Well, they were the sweepings of Havana jail. The men in white and black were the great thieves. And there were children, too. The place was the city orphanage. For the 5th part of a second my advent made no difference. Then, at the far end, one of the men in black and white separated himself and came swiftly to me across the sunny patio. The others followed slowly, with peafowl steps, their women hanging to them and whispering. The bundles of rags rose up towards me. Others slunk furtively out of the barred dens. The man who was approaching had the head of a Julius Caesar of 50, for all the world as if he had stolen a bust, and endowed it with yellow skin and stubby grey and silver hair. He saluted me with intense gravity and an imperial glance of yellow eyes along a hooked nose. His linen was the most spotless broidered and embossed stuff. From the crimson scarf round his waist protruded the shagreen and silver handle of a long dagger. He said, "Senor, I have the honor to salute you. I am Crisostomo Garcia. I ask the courtesy of your trousers." I did not answer him. I did not see what he wanted with my trousers, which weren't anyway as valuable as his own. The others were closing in on me like a solid wall. I leant back against the gate. I was not frightened, but I was mightily excited. The man like Caesar looked fiercely at me, swayed a long way back on his haunches, and imperiously motioned the crowd to recede. "Senor Inglesito," he said, "the gift I have the honor to ask of you is the price of my protection. Without it these my brothers will tear you limb from limb, there will nothing of you remain." His brothers set up a stealthy, sinister growl that went round among the heads like the mutter of an obscene echo among the mountain tops. I wondered whether this, perhaps, was the man who, O'Brien said, would put a knife in my back. I hadn't any knife. I might knock the fellow's teeth down his throat, though. The alcalde thrust his immense hat, blood-red face, and long, ragged, silver locks out of the little door. His features were convulsed with indignation. He had been whispering with the civil guard. "Are you mad, gentlemen?" he said. "Do you wish to visit hell before your times? Do you know who the senor is? Did you ever hear of Carlos el Demonio? This is the Inglesito of Rio Medio." It was plain that my deeds, such as they were, reported by O'Brien's spies, by the Lugarenos, by all sorts of credulous gossipers, had got me the devil of a reputation in the patio of the jail. Men detached themselves from the crowd, and went running about to announce my arrival. The alcalde drew his long body into the patio, and turned to lock the little door with an immense key. In the crowd all sorts of little movements happened. Women crossed themselves, and furtively thrust pairs of crooked, skinny, brown, black-nailed fingers in my direction. The man like Caesar said, "I ask your pardon, Senor Caballero. I did not know, how could I tell, you are free of all the patios in this land." The tall alcalde finished grinding the immense key in the lock, and touched me on the arm. "If the senor will follow me," he said, "I will do the honors of this humble mansion, and indicate a choice of rooms where he may be free from the visits of these gentry." We went up steps and through long, shadowy corridors, with here and there a dark, lounging figure, like a stag seen in the dim aisles of a wood. The alcalde threw open a door. The room was like a blazing oblong box, filled with light, but without window or chimney. 2 men were fencing in the illumination of some 20 candles stuck all round the mildewed white walls on lumps of clay. There was a blaze of silver things, like an altar of a wealthy church, from a black carved table in the far corner. The 2 men in shirts and breeches revolved round each other, their rapiers clinking, their left arms scarved, holding buttoned daggers. The alcalde proclaimed, "Don Vincent Salazar, I have the honor to announce an English senor." The man with his face to me tossed his rapier impatiently into a corner. He was a plump, dark Cuban with a brooding truculence. The other faced round quickly. His cheeks shone in the candlelight like polished yellow leather. His eyes were narrow slits, his face lugubrious. He scrutinized me intently, then drawled, "My yous, hang me if I didn't think it would be you." He had the air of surveying a monstrosity, and pulled the neck of his dirty print shirt open, panting. He slouched out into the corridor and began whispering eagerly to the alcalde. The little Cuban glowered at me. I said I had the honor to salute him. He muttered something contemptuous between his teeth. Well, if he didn't want to talk to me, I didn't want to talk to him. It had struck me that the tall, sallow man was undoubtedly the second mate of the Thames. Nicholas, the real Nicola El Escoses. The Cuban grumbled suddenly. "You, senor, are without doubt one of the spies of that friend of the priest's, that O'Brien. Tell him to beware, that I bid him beware. I Don Vincent Salazar de Valdepefias y Forley y." I remembered the name. He was once the suitor of Serafina, the man O'Brien had put out of the way. He continued with a grotesque frown of portentous significance. "Tomorrow I leave this place, and your compatriot is very much afraid, senor. Let him fear, but 1,000 spies should not save him." The tall alcalde came hurriedly back and stood bowing between us. He apologized abjectly to the Cuban for intruding me upon him, but the room was the best in the place at the disposal of the prisoners of the Jews O'Brien, and I was a noted caballero. Heaven knows what I had not done in Rio Medio. Burnt, slain, ravished. The senor Jews was understood to be much incensed against me. The gloomy Cuban at once rushed upon me, as if he would have taken me into his arms. The inglesito of Rio Medio, he said. Ha ha, much have I heard of you, much of the Senor's valiance, many tales. That foul eater of the carrion of the priests wishes your life. Ah, but let him beware, I shall save you, Senor, I Don Vincent Salazar. He presented me with the room, a remarkably bare place but for his properties. Silver branch candlesticks, a silver chafing dish as large as a basin. They might have been chased by Cellini. One used to find things like that in Cuba in those days, and Salazar was the person to have them. Afterwards, at the time of the first insurrection, his 8-mule harness was sold for £4,000 in Paris, by reason of the gold and pearls upon it. The atmosphere, he explained, was fetid, but his man was coming to burn sandalwood and beat the air with fans. And tomorrow, he said, his eyes rolling. Suddenly he stopped. Senor, he said, is it true that my venerated friend, my more than father, has been murdered at the instigation of that fiend? Is it true that the senorita has disappeared? These tales are told. I said it was very true. They shall be avenged, he declared. Tomorrow, I shall seek out the senorita. I shall find her, I shall find her. For me she was destined by my venerable friend. He snatched a black velvet jacket from the table and put it on. Afterwards, Senor, you shall relate, have no fear, I shall save you. I shall save all men oppressed by this scourge of the land. For the moment afford me the opportunity to meditate. He crossed his arms and dropped his round head. Alas, yes, he meditated. Suddenly he waved towards the door. Senor, he said swiftly, I must have air, I stifle, come with me to the corridor. He went towards the window giving on to the patio. He stood in the shadow, his arms folded, his head hanging dejectedly. At the moment it grew suddenly dark, as if a veil had been thrown over a lamp. The sun had set outside the walls. A drum began to beat. Down below in the obscurity, the crowd separated into 3 strings and moved slowly towards the barren tunnels. Under our feet the white shirts disappeared. The ragged crowd gravitated to the left, the small children strung into the square cage door. The drum beat again and the crowd hurried. Then there was a clang of closing grills and lights began to show behind the bars from deep recesses. In a little time there was a repulsive hash of heads and limbs to be seen under the arches vanishing a long way within, and a little light washed across the gravel of the patio from within. Senor, the Cuban said suddenly, I will pronounce his panegyric. He was a man of a great gentleness, of an inevitable nobility, of an invariable courtesy. Where in this degenerate age shall we find the like? He stopped to breathe a sound of intense exasperation. When I think of these Irish, he said, of that O'Brien. A servant was arranging the shining room that we had left. Salazar interrupted himself to give some orders about a banquet, then returned to me. I tell you I am here for introducing my knife to the spine of some sort of Madrid embustero, a man who was insolent to my amiga Clara. Do you believe that for that this O'Brien, by the influence of the priests whose souls he licks with his tongue, has had me enclosed for many months? Because he feared me. Aha, I was about to expose him to the noble Don who is now dead. I was about to wed the senorita who has disappeared. But tomorrow, I shall expose his intrigue to the Captain General. You, Senor, shall be my witness. I extend my protection to you. He crossed his arms and spoke with much deliberation. Senor, this Irishman incommodes me, Don Vincent Salazar de Valdepena's wife Orly. He nodded his head expressively. Senor, we offered these Irish the shelter of our robe, for that your government was making martyrs of them who were good Christians, and it behoves us to act in despite of your government, who are heretics and not to be tolerated upon God's Christian earth. But, Senor, if they incommoded your government as they do us, I do not wonder that there was a desire to remove them. Senor, the life of that man is not worth the price of 8 mules, which is the price I have paid for my release. I might walk free at this moment, but it is not fitting that I should slink away under cover of darkness. I shall go out in the daylight with my carriage, and I will have an offering to show my friends who, like me, are incommoded by this. The man was a monomaniac, but it struck me that, if I had been O'Brien, I should have felt uncomfortable. In the dark of the corridor, a long shape appeared, lounging. The Cuban beside me started hospitably forward. Vamos, he said briskly, to the banquet. He waved his hand towards the shining door and stood aside. We entered. The other man was undoubtedly the Nova Scotian mate of the Thames, the man who had dissuaded me from following Carlos on the day we sailed into Kingston Harbour. He was chewing a toothpick, and at the ruminant motion of his knife jaws I seemed to see him, sitting naked to the waist in his bunk, instead of upright there in red trousers and a blue shirt, an immense length of each. I pieced his history together in a sort of flash. He was the true Nicola L. Escoses. His name was Nichols, and he came from Nova Scotia. He had been the chief of O'Brien's Lugarenos. He surveyed me now with a twinkle in his eyes, his yellow jaws as shiny shaven as of old, his arms as much like a semaphore. He said mockingly, "So you went there after all." But the Cuban was pressing us towards his banquet. There was gazpacho in silver plates and a man in livery holding something in a napkin. It worried me. We surveyed each other in silence. I wondered what Nichols knew, what it would be safe to tell him, how much he could help me. One or other of these men undoubtedly might. The Cuban was an imbecile, but he might have some influence, and if he really were going out on the morrow and really did go to the Captain General, he certainly could further his own revenge on O'Brien by helping me. But as for Nichols, Salazar began to tell a long, exaggerated story about his cook, whom he had imported from Paris. "Think," he said, "I bring the fool 2,000 miles and then not even able to begin on a land crab. A fool." The Nova Scotian cast an uninterested side glance at him and said in English, which Salazar did not understand, "So you went there after all, and now he's got you." I did not answer him. "I know all about you," he added. "It's more than I do about you," I said. He rose and suddenly jerked the door open, peered on each side of the corridor, and then sat down again. "I'm not afraid to tell," he said defiantly. "I'm not afraid of anything, I'm safe." The Cuban said to me in Spanish, "This Senor is my friend. Everyone who hates that devil is my friend." "I'm safe," Nichols repeated. "I know too much about our friend the Rapparee." He lowered his voice. "They say you're to be given up for piracy, eh?" His eyes had an extraordinarily anxious leer. "You are now, eh? For how much? Can't you tell a man? We're in the same boat, I can help you." Salazar accidentally knocked a silver goblet off the table, and at the sound, Nichols sprang half off his chair. He glared in a wild stare around him, then grasped at a flagon of aguardiente and drank. "I'm not afraid of any damn thing," he said. "I've got a hold on that man. He dursn't give me up, I kin see. He's going to give you up and say you're responsible for it all." "I don't know what he's going to do," I answered. "Will you not, Senor?" Salazar said suddenly. "Relate, if you can without distress, the heroic death of that venerated man." I glanced involuntarily at Nichols. "The distress," I said, "would be very great. I was Don Balthazar's kinsman. The Senor O'Brien had a great fear of my influence in the casa. It was in trying to take me away that Don Balthazar, who defended me, was slain by the Lugarenos of O'Brien." Salazar said, "Aha, aha, we are kindred spirits, hated and loved by the same souls, this fiend Senor, and then I escaped by sea in an open boat in the confusion. When I reached Havana, the Jews had me arrested." Salazar raised both hands. His gestures made for large, grave men were comic in him. They reduced Spanish manners to absurdity. He said, "That man dies, that man dies. Tomorrow I go to the Captain General. He shall hear this story of yours, Senor. He shall know of these machinations which bring honest men to this place. We are a band of brothers." "That's what I say," Nichols leered at me. "We're all in the same boat." I expect he noticed that I wasn't moved by his declaration. He said, still in English, "Let us be open, let's have a council of war. This O'Brien hates me because I wouldn't fire on my own countrymen." He glanced furtively at me. "I wouldn't," he asserted. "He wanted me to fire into their boats, but I wouldn't. Don't you believe the tales they tell about me? They tell worse about you. Who says I would fire on my countrymen? Where's the man who says it?" He had been drinking more brandy and glared ferociously at me. "None of your tricks, my hearty," he said. "None of your getting out and spreading tales. O'Brien's my friend, he'll never give me up. He dursn't, I know too much. You're a pirate, no doubt it was you who fired into them boats. By God, I'll be witness against you if they give me up. I'll show you up." All the while the little Cuban talked swiftly and with a saturnine enthusiasm. He passed the wine rapidly. "My own countrymen," Nichols shouted. "Never I shot a Yankee lieutenant, Allen he was, with my own hand. That's another thing I'm not a man to trifle with. No, sir, don't you try it. Why, I've papers that would hang O'Brien. I sent them home to Halifax. I know a trick worth his. By God, let him try it, let him only try it. He dursn't give me up." The man in livery came in to snuff the candles. Nichols sprang from his seat in a panic and drew his knife with frantic haste. He continued, glaring at me from the wall, the knife in his hand. "Don't you dream of tricks. I've cut more throats than you've kissed gals in your little life." Salazar himself drew an immense pointed knife with a shagreen hilt. He kissed it rapturously. "Aha, aha," he said, "bear this kiss into his ribs at the back." His eyes glistened with this mania. "I swear it when I next see this dog, this friend of the priest's." He threw the knife on the table. "Look," he said, "was ever steel truer or more thirsty?" Don't you make no mistake, Nichols continued to me. Don't you think to presume, O'Brien's my friend, I'm here snug and out of the way of the old fool of an admiral, that's why he's kept waiting off the morrow. When he goes, I walk out free. Don't you try to frighten me, I'm not a man to be frightened. Salazar bubbled, but now the wine flows and is red. We are a band of brothers, each loving the other. Brothers, let us drink. The air of close confinement, the blaze, the feel of the jail pressed upon me, and I felt sore suddenly at having eaten and drunk with those two. The idea of Seraphina, asleep perhaps, crying perhaps, something pure and distant and very blissful, came in upon me irresistibly. The little Cuban said, "We have had a very delightful conversation. It is very plain this O'Brien must die." I rose to my feet. "Gentlemen," I said in Spanish, "I am very weary, I will go and sleep in the corridor." The Cuban sprang towards me with an immense anxiety of hospitableness. I was to sleep on his couch, the couch of cloth of gold. It was impossible, it was insulting that I should think of sleeping in the corridor. He thrust me gently down upon it, making with his plump hands the motions of smoothing it to receive me. I lay down and turned my face to the wall. It wasn't possible to sleep, even though the little Cuban, with a tender solicitude, went round the walls blowing out the candles. He might be useful to me, might really explain matters to the Captain General, or might even, as a last resource, take a letter from me to the British consul. But I should have to be alone with him. Nichols was an abominable scoundrel, bloodthirsty to the defenceless, a liar, craven before the ghost of a threat. No doubt O'Brien did not want to give him up. Perhaps he had papers, and no doubt once he could find a trace of Seraphina's whereabouts, O'Brien would give me up. All I could do was to hope for a gain of time, and yet if I gained time it could only mean that I should in the end be given up to the Admiral. And Seraphina's whereabouts, it came over me lamentably that I myself did not know. The Lion might have sailed, it was possible, she might be at sea. Then perhaps my only chance of ever seeing her again lay in my being given up to the Admiral, to stand in England a trial, perhaps for piracy, perhaps for treason. I might meet her only in England after many years of imprisonment. It wasn't possible, I would not believe in the possibility. How I loved her, how wildly, how irrationally, this woman of another race, of another world, bound to me by sufferings together, by joys together. Irrationally, looking at the matter now, the reason is plain enough. Before then I had not lived. I had only waited for her and for what she stood for. It was in my blood, in my race, in my tradition, in my training. We, all of us for generations, had made for efficiency, for drill, for restraint. Our romance was just this very Spanish contrast, this obliquity of vision, this slight tilt of the convex mirror that shaped the same world so differently to onlookers at different points of its circle. I could feel a little of it even then, when there was only the merest chance of my going back to England and getting back towards our old position on the rim of the mirror. The deviousness, the wayward passion, even the sempiternal abuses of the land were already beginning to take the aspect of something like quaint impotence. It was charm that, now I was on the road away, was becoming apparent. The inconveniences of life, the physical discomforts, the smells of streets, the heat, dropped into the background. I felt that I did not want to go away irrevocably from a land sanctioned by her presence, her young life. I turned uneasily to the other side. At the heavy black table, in the light of a single candle, the Cuban and the Nova Scotian were discussing, their heads close together. "I tell you no," Nichols was saying in a fluent, abominable, literal translation into Spanish. "Take the knife so, thumb upwards, stab down in the soft between the neck and the shoulder blade. You get right into the lungs with the point. I've tried it 10 times, never stick the back. The chances are he moves and you hit a bone. There are no bones there, it's the way they kill pigs in New Jersey." The Cuban bent his brows as if he were reflecting over a chessboard. "Ma," he pondered, his knife was lying on the table. He unsheathed it, then got up and moved behind the seated Nova Scotian. "You say, there?" he asked, pressing his little finger at the base of Nichols' skinny column of a neck. And then, he measured the length of the knife on Nichols's back twice with elaborate care, breathing through his nostrils. Then he said with a convinced, musing air, "It is true, it would go down into the lungs." "And there are arteries and things," Nichols said. "Yes, yes," the Cuban answered, sheathing the knife and thrusting it into his belt. With a knife that length it's perfect. Nichols waved his shadowy hand towards Salazar's scarf. Salazar moved off a little. "I see the advantages," he said. "No crying out because of the blood in the lungs. I thank you, Senor Escoses." Nichols rose, lurching to his full height, and looked in my direction. I closed my eyes. I did not wish him to talk to me. I heard him say, "Well, haste de Mars ver, I shall get away from here. Good night." He swayed an immense shadow through the door. Salazar took the candle and followed him into the corridor. Yes, that was it, why she was so great a part, a whole wall, a whole beam of my life's house. I saw her suddenly in the blackness, her full red lips, her quivering nostrils, the curve of her breasts, her lithe movements from the hips, the way she set her feet down, the white flower waxen in the darkness of her hair, and the robin-wing flutter of her lids over her grey eyes when she smiled. I moved convulsively in my intense desire. I would have given my soul, my share of eternity, my honor, only to see that flutter of the lids over the shining grey eyes. I never felt I was beneath the imponderable pressure of a prison's wall till then. She was infinite miles away. I could not even imagine what inanimate things surrounded her. She must be talking to someone else, fluttering her lids like that. I recognized with a physical agony that was more than jealousy how slight was my hold upon her. It was not in her race, in her blood as in mine, to love me and my type. She had lived all her life in the middle of romance, and the very fire and passion of her south must make me dim prose to her. I remember the flicker of Salazar's returning candle, cast in lines like an advancing scythe across the two walls from the corridor. I slept. I had the feeling of appalled horror suddenly invading my sleep. A vast voice seemed to be exclaiming, "Tell me where she is." I looked at the glowing horn of a lanthorn. It was O'Brien who held it. He stood over me, very somber. "Tell me where she is," he said, the moment my eyes opened. I said, she's, I don't know. It appalls me even now to think how narrow was my escape. It was only because I had gone to sleep in the thought that I did not know, that I answered that I did not know. Ah, he was a cunning devil, to suddenly wake one, to get one's thoughts before one had had time to think. I lay looking at him, shivering. I couldn't even see much of his face. "Where is she?" he said again. "Where? Dead, dead. God have mercy on your soul if the child is dead." I was still trembling. If I had told him, I could hardly believe I had not. He continued bending over me with an attitude that hideously mocked solicitude. "Where is she?" he asked again. "Ransack the island," I said. He glared at me, lifting the lamp. "The whole earth, if you like." He ground his teeth, bending very low over me, then stood up, raising his head into the shadow above the lamp. "What do I care for all the admirals?" He was speaking to himself. "No ship shall leave Havana till—" He groaned. I heard him slap his forehead and say distractedly, "But perhaps she is not in a ship." There was a silence in which I heard him breathe heavily, and then he amazed me by saying, "Have pity." I laughed, lying on my back. "On you." He bent down. "Fool, on yourself." A vast and towering shadow ran along the wall. There wasn't a sound. The face of Salazar appeared behind him and an uplifted hand grasping a knife. O'Brien saw the horror in my eyes. I gasped to him, "Look," and before he could move the knife went softly home between neck and shoulder. Salazar glided to the door and turned to wave his hand at me. O'Brien's lips were pressed tightly together. The handle of the knife was against his ear. The lanthorn hung at the end of his rigid arm for a moment. As he lowered it, the blood spurted from his shoulder as if from a burst standpipe, only black and warm. It fell over my face, over my hands, everywhere. For a minute of eternity his agonized eyes searched my features, as if to discern whether I had connived, whether I condoned. I had started up, my face coming right against his. I felt an immense horror. What did it mean? What had he done? He had been such a power for so long, so inevitably, over my whole life that I could not even begin to understand that this was not some new subtle villainy of his. He shook his head slowly, his ear disturbing the knife. Then he turned jerkily on his heel, the lanthorn swinging round and leaving me in his shadow. There were 10 paces to reach the door. It was like the finish of a race, whether he would cover the remaining 7 after the first 3 steps. The dangling lanthorn shed small patches of light through the holes in the metal top, like sunlight through leaves, upon the gloom of the remote ceiling. At the 5th step, he pressed his hand spasmodically to his mouth. At the 6th, he wavered to one side. I made a sudden motion as if to save him from falling. He was dying, he was dying. I hardly realized what it meant. This immense weight was being removed from me. I had no need to fear him any more. I couldn't understand, I could only look. This was his passing. This. He sank, knelt down, placing the Ian Thorn on the floor. He covered his face with his hands and began to cough incessantly, like a man dying of consumption. The glowing top of the lanthorn hissed and sputtered out in little sharp blows like hammer strokes. Carlos had coughed like that. Carlos was dead. Now O'Brien, he was going, I should escape. It was all over. Was it all over? He bowed stiffly forward, placing his hands on the stones, then lay over on his side with his face to the light, his eyes glaring at it. I sat motionless, watching him. The lanthorn lit the carved leg of the black table and a dusty circle of the flags. The spurts of blood from his shoulder grew less long in answer to the pulsing of his heart. His fists unclenched, he drew his legs up to his body, then sank down. His eyes looked suddenly at mine, and as the features slowly relaxed, the smile seemed to come back, enigmatic, round his mouth. He was dead, he was gone, I was free. He would never know where she was, never. He had gone with the question on his lips, with the agony of uncertainty in his eyes. From the door came an immense, grotesque and horrible chuckle. Aha, aha, I have saved you, Senor, I have protected you. We are as brothers. Against the tenuous blue light of the dawn, Salazar was gesticulating in the doorway. I felt a sudden repulsion, a feeling of intense disgust. O'Brien lying there, I almost wished alive again. I wanted to have him again, rather than that I should have been relieved of him by that atrocious murder. I sat looking at both of them. Saved by that lunatic, I suddenly appreciated the agony of mind that alone could have brought O'Brien, the cautious, the all-seeing, into this place, to ask me a question that for him was answered now, answered for him more than for me. Where was Serafina? Where, how should I come to her? O'Brien was dead, and one could I walk out of this place and go to her? O'Brien was dead, but one. I suddenly realized that now I was the pirate Nicola L. Escos's, that now he was no more there, nothing could save me from being handed over to the Admiral. Nothing. Salazar outside, the door began to call boastfully, towards the sound of approaching footsteps. Aha, aha, come all of you, see what I have done. Come, Senor Alcade, come, brave soldiers. In that way died this man whose passion had for so long hung over my life like a shadow. Looking at the matter now, I am perhaps glad that he fell neither by my hand nor in my quarrel. I assuredly had injured him the first. I had come upon his ground, I had thwarted him, I had been a heavy weight at a time when his fortunes had been failing. Failing they undoubtedly were. He had run his course too far. And if his death removed him out of my path, the legacy of his intrigue caused me suffering enough. Had he lived, there is no knowing what he might have done. He was bound to deliver someone to the British, either myself or Nichols. Perhaps at the last moment he would have kept me in Havana, there is no saying. Undoubtedly he had not wished to deliver Nichols, either because he really knew too much or because he had scruples. Nichols had certainly been faithful to him, and with his fine irony, it was delightful to him to think that I should die a felon's death in England. For those reasons, he had identified me with Nicola L. Escos's, intending to give up whichever suited him at the last moment. Now that was settled for him and for me. The delivery was to take place at dawn, and O'Brien not to be found. The old judge of the first instance had been sent to identify the prisoner. He selected me, whom of course he recognized. There was no question of Nichols, who had been imprisoned on a charge of theft trumped up by O'Brien. Salazar, whether he would have gone to the Captain General or not, was now entirely useless. He was retained to answer the charge of murder, and to any protestations I could make, the old Jews was entirely deaf. The Senor must make representations to his own authorities, he said. I have warrant for what I have done. It was impossible to expose O'Brien to him. The soldiers of the escort in the dawn before the prison gates simply laughed at me. They marched me down through the grey mists to the water's edge. 2 soldiers held my arms. O'Brien's blood was drying on my face and on my clothes. I was, even to myself, a miserable object. Among the negresses on the slimy boat steps, a thick, short man was asking questions. He opened amazed eyes at the sight of me. It was Williams. The lion was not yet gone then. If he spoke to me or gave token of connection with Serafina, the Spaniards would understand. They would take her from him certainly, perhaps immure her in a convent. And now that I was bound irrevocably for England, she must go too. He was shouldering his way towards my guards. Silence, I shouted without looking at him. Go away, make sail, tell Sebright. My guards seemed to think I had gone mad. They laid hands upon me. I didn't struggle, and we passed down towards the landing steps, brushing Williams aside. He stood perturbedly gazing after me. Then I saw him asking questions of a civil guard. A man-o'-war's boat, the ensign trailing in the glassy water, the glazed hats of the seamen bobbing like clockwork, was flying towards us. Here was England, here was home. I should have to clear myself of felony, to strain every nerve and cheat the gallows. If only Williams understood, if only he did not make a fool of himself. I couldn't see him any more. A jabbering crowd all round us was being kept at a distance by the muskets of the soldiers. My only chance was Sebright's intelligence. He might prevent Williams making a fool of himself. The commander of the guard said to the lieutenant from the flagship, who had landed, attended by the master-at-arms, I have the honour to deliver to your worship's custody the prisoner promised to His Excellency the English Admiral. Here are the papers disclosing his crimes to the justice. I beg for a receipt. A shabby escrivano from the prison advanced bowing with an inkhorn shaking a wet goosequill. A guardia civil offered his back. The lieutenant signed a paper hastily, then looking hard at me gave the order. Master-at-arms, handcuff one of the prisoner's hands to your own wrist. He is a desperate character. Chapter 3. The first decent word I had spoken to me after that for months came from my turnkey at Newgate. It was when he welcomed me back from my examination before the Thames Court magistrate. The magistrate, a bad-tempered man, snuffy with red eyes, and the air of being a piece of worn and dirty furniture of his court, had snapped at me when I tried to speak. Keep your lies for the Admiralty session. I've only time to commit you. Damn your Spaniards, why can't they translate their own papers? Had signed something with a squeaky quill, tossed it to his clerk and grunted, next case. I had gone back to Newgate. The turnkey, a man with the air of an innkeeper, bandy-legged with a bulbous, purple-veined nose and watering eyes, slipped out of the gatehouse door, whilst the great, hollow-sounding gate still shook behind me. He said, "If you hurries up you'll see a bit of life. Do you good? Condemned sermon being preached in the chapel now, sheriffs and all. They swing tomorrow, 3 of them, quick with the stumps." He hurried me over the desolate mossy green cobbles of the great solitary yard into a square, tall, bare, whitewashed place. Already from the outside one caught a droning voice. There might have been 300 people there, boxed off in pews with turnkeys at each end. A vast King's Arms, a splash of red and blue gilt, sprawled above a 2-tiered pulpit that was like the trunk of a large broken tree. The turnkey pulled my hat off and nudged me into a box beside the door. "Kneel down," he whispered hoarsely. I knelt. A man with a new wig was droning out words, waving his hands now and then from the top of the tall pulpit. Beneath him a smaller man in an old wig was dozing, his head bent forward. The place was dirty and ill-lighted by the tall, grimy windows, heavily barred. A pair of candles flickered beside the preacher's right arm. "They that go down to the sea in ships, my poor brethren," he droned, lying under the shadow. He directed his hands towards a tall deal box painted black, isolated in the centre of the lower floor. A man with a red head sat in it, his arms folded. Another had his arms covering his head, which leant abjectly forward on the rail in front. There were large rusty gyves upon his wrists. "But observe, my poor friends," the chaplain droned on, "the psalmist saith, at the last he shall bring them unto the desired haven. Now," the turnkey whispered suddenly into my ear, "them's the condemned he's preaching at them in the black pew. See Rogie Cullen wink at the woman prisoners up there in the gallery. Him with the red hair, all swings tomorrow. After they have staggered and reeled to and fro and been amazed, observe, after they have been tempted, even after they have fallen." The sheriffs had their eyes decorously closed. The clerk reached up from below the preacher and snuffed one of the candles. The preacher paused to rearrange his shining wig. Little clouds of powder flew out where he touched it. He struck his purple velvet cushion and continued. "At the last, I say, he shall bring them to the haven they had desired." A jarring shriek rose out of the black pew, and an insensate jangling of irons rattled against the hollow wood. The ironed man, whose head had been hidden, was writhing in an epileptic fit. The governor began signalling to the jailers, and the whole dismal assembly rose to its feet and craned to get a sight. The jailers began hurrying them out of the building. The red-headed man was crouching in the far corner of the black box. The turnkey caught the end of my sleeve and hurried me out of the door. "Come away," he said. "Come out of it, damn my good nature." We went swiftly through the tall, gloomy, echoing stone passages. All the time there was the noise of the prisoners being marshalled somewhere into their distant yards and cells. We went across the bottom of a well, where the weeping December light struck ghastly down onto the stones, into a sort of rabbit warren of black passages and descending staircases, a horror of cold, solitude and night. Iron door after iron door clanged to behind us in the stony blackness. After an interminable traversing, the turnkey, still with his hand on my sleeve, jerked me into my familiar cell. I hadn't thought to be glad to get back to that dim, frozen, damp-chilled little hole, with its hateful stone walls, stone ceiling, stone floor, stone bed slab and stone table, its rope mat, foul stable blanket, its horrible sense of eternal burial out of sound, out of sight under a mined mountain of black stones. It was so tiny that the turnkey, entering after me, seemed to be pressed close up to my chest, and so dark that I could not see the colour of the dirty hair that fell matted from the bald patch on the top of his skull, so familiar that I knew the feel of every little worming of rust on the iron candlestick. He wiped his face with a brown rag of handkerchief and said, "Curse me if ever I go into that place again." After a time he added, "Unless 'tis a matter of duty." I didn't say anything. My nerves were still jangling to that shrieking, and to the clang of the iron doors that had closed behind me. I had an irresistible impulse to get hold of the iron candlestick and smash it home through the skull of the turnkey, as I had done to the men who had killed Seraphina's father. To kill this man, then to creep along the black passages and murder man after man beside those iron doors, until I got to the open air. He began again. "You'd think we'd get used to it, you'd think we would, but 'tis a strain for us. You never knows what the prisoners will do at a scene like that there. It drives 'em mad. Look at this scar. Mashal the forger done that for me, for he was condemned after a sermon like that, a quiet, gentlemanly man much like you. Lord, yes, 'tis a strain." He paused, still wiping his face, then went on. "And I swear that when I sees them men sit there in that black pew, and have heard the hammers going clack, clack on the scaffolding outside, and knew that they hadn't no more chance than you have to get out of there." He pointed his short thumb towards the handkerchief of an opening, where the little blur of blue light wavered through the 2 iron frames crossed in the 9 feet of well. "Lord, you never gets used to it. You wants them to escape. 'Tis in the air through the whole prison, even the debtors. I tells myself again and again, you're a fool for your pains. But it's the same with the others, my mates. You can't get it out of your mind. That little kid now. I've seen children swing, but that little kid as sure to swing as what you are." "You think I am going to swing?" I asked. I didn't want to kill him anymore. I wanted too much to hear him talk. I hadn't heard anything for months and months of solitude, of darkness, on board the Admiral's ship, stranded in the guardship at Plymouth, bumping round the coast, and now here in Newgate. And it had been darkness all the time. Jove, that Cuban time with its movements, its pettiness, its intrigue, its warmth, even its villainies showed plainly enough in the chill of that blackness. It had been romance, that life. Little and far away and irrevocably done with, it showed all golden. There wasn't any romance where I lay then, and there had been irons on my wrists, gruff hatred, the darkness, and always despair. On board the flagship coming home I had been chained down in the cable tier, a place where I could feel every straining of the great ship. Once these had risen to a pandemonium, a frightful tumult. There was a great gale outside. A sailor came down with a lanthorn and tossed my biscuit to me. "You d pirate," he said, "maybe it's you saving us from drowning." "Is the gale very bad?" I had called. He muttered, and the fact that he spoke to me at all showed how great the strain of the weather must have been to wring any words out of him. "Bad, there's a large Indiaman gone. We saw her 1 minute and then he went away muttering." And suddenly the thought had come to me. What if the Indiaman were the lion with Seraphina on board? The man would not speak to me when he came again. No one would speak to me. I was a pirate who had fired on his own countrymen. And the thought had pursued me right into Newgate. If she were dead, if I had taken her from that security, from that peace, to end there, and to end myself. "Swing," the turnkey said. "You'll swing right enough." He slapped the great key on his flabby hand. "You can tell that by the signs. You being an Admiralty case ought to have been in the Marshalsea. And you're ordered solitary cell, and I'm tipped the straight wink against your speaking a blessed word to a blessed soul. Why don't they let you see an attorney? Why? Because they mean you to swing." I said, "Never mind that. Have you heard of a ship called the Lion? Can you find out about her?" He shook his head cunningly and did not answer. If the Lion had been here I must have heard. They couldn't have left me here. I said, "For God's sake find out. Get me a shipping gazette." He affected not to hear. "There's money in plenty," I said. He winked ponderously and began again. "Oh, you'll swing all right. A man with nothing against him has a chance. With the rhino he has it, even if he's guilty. But you'll swing. Charlie, who brought you back just now, had a chat with the Attorney General's devil's clerk's clerk, while old Nargo Bow Street was trying to read their Spanish. He says it's a government matter. They wants to hang you bad, they do, so's to go to the Jackie Spaniards and say, 'He were a nobby knob.' So you are, aren't you? One uncle and Earl and t'other a dean, if so be what they say's true. He were a nobby knob and we swung 9.99. Go you and do likewise. They want a striking example keep the West India trade quiet." He wiped his forehead and moved my water jug of red earth on the dirty deal table under the window, for all the world like a host in front of a guest. "They means you to swing," he said. "They've silenced the Thames court reporters. Not a newspaper will publish a correct report, Timora. And you haven't seen nobody, nor you won't, not if I can help it." He broke off and looked at me with an expression of candor. "Mind you," he said, "I'm not uffish. To an ornery gentleman of the road or what you will, I'm not, if so be he's the necessary, I'd take a letter like another. But for you no fear, not that I've my knife into you. What I can do to make you comfortable I will do both now and hereafter. But when I gets the wink I looks after my skin, so'd any man, you don't see nobody nor you won't, nor your nobby relations won't have the word, till the Hadmulty trial. Charlie says it's unconstitutional, you ought to see your tourney if you've one or your father's got one. But law, I says, Charlie, if they wants it they gets it. This ain't no habeas corpus, give the man a chance case, it's the Hadmulty, and not a man tried for piracy this 30 year. See what a show it gives them, what bloody radical knows or cares what the Persidins should be, who's a go and make a question out of it. Go away, says I to Charlie. And that's it straight. He went towards the door, then turned. You should be in the Marshalsea Common Yard, even I knows that, but they've the wink there. Too full, says they, too full BD, 500. I've knowed the time, after the Vansdell smash it were, when they found room for 300 more improvident debtors over and above what they're charted for. Too full, their common yard. They don't want you to speak to a soul, and you won't till this day week when the Hadmulty session is in full swing. He went out and locked the door, snorting, too full at the Marshalsea. Go away. Find out about the lion, I called as the door closed. It cleared the air for me, that speech. I understood that they wanted to hang me, and I wanted not to be hung desperately from that moment. I had not much cared before, I had, call it, moped. I had not really believed, really sensed it out. It isn't easy to conceive that one is going to be hanged. I doubt if one does even with the rope round one's neck. I hadn't much wanted to live, but now I wanted to fight. One good fight before I went under for good and all, condemned or acquitted. There wasn't anything left for me to live for. Seraphina could not be alive. The lion must have been lost. But I was going to make a fight for it. Curse it, I was going to give them trouble. My them was not so much the government that meant to hang me as the unseen powers that suffered such a state of things, that allowed a number of little meannesses, accidents, fatalities to hang me. I began to worry the turnkey. He gave me no help, only shreds of information that let me see more plainly than ever how set they were on sacrificing me to their exigencies. The whole West Indian trade in London was in an uproar over the pirate question and over the slave question. Jamaica was still squealing for separation before the premonitory grumbles of abolition. Horton Penn, over there, came back with astonishing clearness before me. I seemed to hear old, wall-eyed, sandy-headed MacDonald, agitating his immense bulk of ill-fitting white clothes in front of his newspaper, and bellowing in his ox voice. Abolition, they give us abolition, or ram it down our throats. They who haven't even the spunk to rid us o' the D pirates, not the spunk to catch and hang one. Jock, me lord, we's abolish them before they sail touch our niggers. Let them clear our seas, let them hang one pirate and then talk. I was the one they were going to hang to consolidate the bond with the old island. The cement wanted a little blood in the mixing. Damn them, I was going to make a fight. They had torn me from Seraphina to fulfill their own accursed ends. I felt myself grow harsh and strong, as a tree feels itself grow gnarled by winter storms. I said to the turnkey again and again, Man, I will promise you £1,000 or a pension for life, if you will get a letter through to my mother or Squire Rooksby of Horton. He said he daren't do it. Enough was known of him to hang him if he gave offence. His flabby fingers trembled and his eyes grew large with successive shocks of cupidity. He became afraid of coming near me, of the strain of the temptation. On the next day he did not speak a word, nor the next, nor the next. I began to grow horribly afraid of being hung. The day before the trial arrived, towards noon he flung the door open. Here's paper, here's pens, he said. You can prepare your defence, you may write letters. Oh hell, why did not they let it come sooner? I'd have had your £1,000. I'll run a letter down to your people fast as the devil could take it. I know a man, a gentleman of the road. For 20 pun promised, split between us, he'll travel faster'n Turpin did to York. He was waving a large sheet of newspaper agitatedly. What does it mean? I asked, my head was whirling. Radical papers got a hold of it, he said. Trust them for nosing out, and the government's answering them. They say you're going to suffer for your crimes. Hark to this, the wretched felon now in Newgate will incur the just penalty. Then they slaps the West Indies in the face. When the planters threatened to recur to some other power for protection, they of course believed that the loss of the colonies would be severely felt. But the lion's home, I said. It burst upon me that she must be. Williams or Sebright, he was the man, had been speaking up for me, or Seraphina had been to the Spanish ambassador. She was back, I should see her. I started up. The lion's home, I repeated. The turnkey snarled, She was posted as overdue 3 days ago. I couldn't believe it was true. I saw it in the papers, he grumbled on. I dursn't tell you. He continued violently, blow my dicky, it would make a cat sick. My sudden exaltation, my sudden despair, gave way to indifference. Oh, coming, coming, he shouted in answer to an immense bellowing cry that loomed down the passage without. I heard him grumble, of course, I shan't make a penny. Then he caught hold of my arm. Here, come along, someone to see you in the press yard. He pulled me along the noisome, black warren of passages, slamming the inner door viciously behind him. The press yard, the exercising ground for the condemned, was empty. The last batch had gone out, my batch would be the next to come in, the turnkey said suddenly. It was a well of a place, high black walls going up into the desolate, weeping sky and quite tiny. At one end was a sort of slit in the wall, closed with tall, immense windows. From there a faint sort of rabbit's squeak was going up through the immense roll and rumble of traffic on the other side of the wall. The turnkey pushed me towards it. Go on, he said, I'll not listen, I ought to. But curse me, I'm not a bad sort, he added gloomily. I dare say you'll make it worth my while. I went and peered through the bars at a faint object pressed against other bars, in just another slit across a black passage. What Jackie, boy, what Jackie? Blinking his eyes as if the dim light were too strong for them, a thin, bent man stood there in a brilliant new court coat. His face was meagre in the extreme, the nose and cheekbones polished and transparent like a bigaroon cherry. A thin tuft of reddish hair was brushed back from his high, shining forehead. It was my father, he exclaimed. What Jackie, boy, how old you look, then waved his arm towards me. In trouble, he said, you in trouble. He rubbed his thin hands together and looked round the place with a cultured man's air of disgust. I said, Father, and he suddenly began to talk very fast and agitatedly of what he had been doing for me. My mother, he said, was crippled with rheumatism, and Rooksby and Veronica on the preceding Thursday had set sail for Jamaica. He had read to my mother, beside her bed, the newspaper containing an account of my case, and she had given him money, and he had started with violent haste for London. The haste and the rush were still dazing him. He had lived down there in the farmhouse beneath the downs, with the stackyards under his eyes, with his books of verse and his few prints on the wall. My God, how it all came back to me. In his disjointed speeches, I could see how exactly the same it all remained. The same old surly man with a squint had driven him along the muddy roads in the same ancient gig, past the bare elms, to meet the coach. And my father had never been in London since he had walked the streets with the Prince Regent's friends. Whilst he talked to me there, lines of verse kept coming to his lips, and after the habitual pleasure of the apt quotation, he felt acutely shocked at the inappropriateness of the place, the press yard, with the dim light weeping downwards between immensely high walls, and the desultory snowflakes that dropped between us, and he had tried so hard in his emergency to be practical. When he had reached London, before even attempting to see me, he had run from minister to minister trying to influence them in my favour, and he reached me in Newgate with nothing at all affected. I seemed to know him then, so intimately, so much better than anything else in the world. He began, I had my idea in the up-coach last night. I thought, a very great personage was indebted to me in the old days, more indebted than you are aware of, Johnny. I will intercede with him. That was why my first step was to my old tailor's in Conduit Street, because, what is fit for a farm for a palace were low. He stopped, reflected, then said, what is fit for the farm for the palace were low. He felt across his coat for his breast pocket. It was what he had done years and years ago, and all these years between, inscribe ideas for lines of verse in his pocketbook. I said, You have seen the king. His face lengthened a little. Not seen him, but I found one of the Duke's secretaries, a pleasant young fellow, not such as we used to be, but the Duke was kind enough to interest himself. Perhaps my name has lived in the land. I was called Curricle Kemp, as I may have told you, because I drove a vermilion one with green and gilt wheels. His face, peering at me through the bars, had for a moment a flush of pride. Then he suddenly remembered, and as if to propitiate his own reproof, he went on. I saw the Secretary of State, and he assured me very civilly that not even the highest personage in the land. He dropped his voice. Jackie, boy, he said, his narrow-lidded eyes peering miserably across at me, there's not even hope of a reprieve afterwards. I leaned my face wearily against the iron bars. What, after all, was the use of fighting if the lion were not back? Then suddenly, as the sound of his words echoed down the bare, black corridors, he seemed to realize the horror of it. His face grew absolutely white, he held his head erect, as if listening to a distant sound. And then he began to cry, horribly and for a long time. It was I that had to comfort him. His head had bowed at the conviction of his hopeless uselessness. All through his own life, he had been made ineffectual by his indulgence in perfectly innocent, perfectly trivial enjoyments, and now, in this extremity of his only son, he was rendered almost fantastically of no avail. "No, no, sir, you have done all that anyone could. You couldn't break these walls down. Nothing else would help." Small, hopeless sobs shook him continually. His thin, delicate white fingers gripped the black grill with the convulsive grasp of a very weak man. It was more distressing to me than anything I had ever seen or felt. The mere desire, the intense desire to comfort him, made me get a grip upon myself again, and I remembered that now that I could communicate with the outer air, it was absolutely easy. He would save my life. I said, "You have only to go to Clapham, sir." And the moment I was in a state to command him, to direct him, to give him something to do, he became a changed man. He looked up and listened. I told him to go to Major Cowper's. It would be easy enough to find him at Clapham. Cowper, I remembered, could testify to my having been seized by Tomas Castro. He had seen me fight on the decks, and what was more, he would certainly know the addresses of Kingston planters if any were in London. They could testify that I had been in Jamaica all the while Nicola L. Escoses was in Rio Medio. I knew there were some. My father was fidgeting to be gone. He had his name marked for him and a will directing his own. He was not the same man, but I particularly told him to send me a lawyer first of all. "Yes, yes," he said, fidgeting, "to go to Major Cowper's. Let me write his address." "And a solicitor," I said. "Send him to me on your way there." "Yes, yes," he said. "I shall be able to be of use to the solicitor. As a rule, they are men of no great perspicacity." And he went hurriedly away. The real torture, the agony of suspense began then. I steadied my nerves by trying to draw up notes for my speech to the jury on the morrow. That was the turnkey's idea. He said, "Slap your chest, peel to the honour of a British gent and pitch it in strong." It was not much good. I could not keep to any logical sequence of thought. My mind was forever wandering to what my father was doing. I pictured him in his new blue coat, running agitatedly through crowded streets, his coat-tails flying behind his thin legs. The hours dragged on, and it was a matter of minutes. I had to hold upon the table edge to keep myself from raging about the cell. I tried to bury myself again in the scheme for my defence. I wondered whom my father would have found. There was a man called Kerry who had gone home from Kingston. He had a bald head and blue eyes. He must remember me, if he would corroborate. And the lawyer, when he came, might take another line of defence. It began to fall dusk slowly through the small barred windows. The entire night passed without a word from my father. I paced up and down the whole time, composing speeches to the jury. And then the day broke. I calmed myself with a sort of frantic energy. Early the jailer came in and began fussing about my cell. "Case comes on about 1, he said. "Grand jury at 12:30. No fear they won't return a true bill. Grand jury 5 West India merchants, they means to have you. Torney General, Lictor General, Sir Robert Meade and 5 juniors agin you. You take my tip, throw yourself on the mercy of the court and make a rousing speech with a young ooman in it. Not that you'll get much mercy from them. They Admiralty jedges is all hangers. So we say, once it the anchor goes up in the Old Bailey, there ain't no hope. We begins to clean out the scene-demmed cell here. Sticks the anchor up over their heads when it is Admiralty case," he commented. I listened to him with strained attention. I made up my mind to miss not a word uttered that day. It was my only chance. "You don't know anyone from Jamaica?" I asked. He shook his bullet head and tapped his purple nose. "Can't be done," he said. "You'd get a ornery halibi for a guinea a head, but they'd keep out of this case. They've necks like you and me." Whilst he was speaking, the whole of the outer world, as far as it affected me, came suddenly in upon me. That was what I meant to the great city that lay all round, the world in the centre of which was my cell. To the great mass I was matter for a sensation. To them I might prove myself beneficial in this business. Perhaps there were others who were thinking I might be useful in one way or another. There were the ministers of the Crown, who did not care much whether Jamaica separated or not. But they wanted to hang me because they would be able to say disdainfully to the planters, "Separate if you like, we've done our duty, we've hanged a man." All those people had their eyes on me, and they were about the only ones who knew of my existence. That was the end of my romance. Romance! The broadsheet sellers would see to it afterwards with a dying confession. Chapter 4. I never saw my father again until I was in the prisoners' anteroom at the Old Bailey. It was full of lounging men, whose fleshy limbs bulged out against the tight, loud checks of their coats and trousers. These were jailers waiting to bring in their prisoners. On the other side of one black door, the grand jury was deliberating on my case. Behind another, the court was in waiting to try me. I was in a sort of tired lull. All night I had been pacing up and down, trying to bring my brain to think of points in my defense. It was very difficult. I knew that I must keep cool, be calm, be lucid, be convincing, and my brain had reeled at times, even in the darkness of the cell. I knew it had reeled, because I remembered that once I had fallen against the stone of one of the walls, and once against the door. Here in the light, with only a door between myself and the last scene, I regained my hold. I was going to fight every inch from start to finish. I was going to let no chink of their armor go untried. I was going to make a good fight. My teeth chattered like castanets, jarring in my jaws until it was painful. But that was only with the cold. A hubbub of expostulation was going on at the third door. My turnkey called suddenly, "Let the gen'man in, Charlie. Pal O'Earn," and my father ran huntedly into the room. He began an endless tale of a hackney coachman who had stood in front of the door of his coach to prevent his number being taken, of a crowd of caddy smashers who had hustled him and filched his purse. "Of course I made a fight for it," he said. "A damn good fight, considering it's in the blood. But the watch came, and in short, on such an occasion as this there is no time for words. I passed the night in the watch house. Many and many a night I passed there when I and Lord, but I am losing time." "You ain't fit to walk the streets of London alone, sir," the turnkey said. My father gave him a corner of his narrow-lidded eyes. "My man," he said, "I walked the streets with the highest in the land before your mother bore you in Bridewell, or whatever jail it was." "Oh, no offence," the turnkey muttered. I said, "Did you find Cowper, sir? Will he give evidence?" "Jackie," he said agitatedly, as if he were afraid of offending me, "he said you had filched his wife's rings." That, in fact, was what Major Cowper had said, that I had dropped into their ship near Port Royal Heads, and had afterwards gone away with the pirates who had filched his wife's rings. My father, in his indignation, had not even deigned to ask him for the address of Jamaica planters in London, and on his way back to find a solicitor he had come into contact with those street rowdies and the watch. He had only just come from before the magistrates. A man with one eye poked his head suddenly from behind the grand jury door. He jerked his head in my direction. "True bill against that air," he said, then drew his head in again. "Jackie boy," my father said, putting a thin hand on my wrist and gazing imploringly into my eyes, "I 1,000. I can't tell you how." I said, "It doesn't matter, father." I felt a foretaste of how my past would rise up to crush me. Cowper had let that wife of his coerce him into swearing my life away. I remembered vividly his blubbering protestations of friendship when I persuaded Tomas Castro to return him his black deed box with the brass handle, on that deck littered with rubbish. "Oh, God bless you, God bless you. You have saved me from starvation." There had been tears in his old blue eyes. "If you need it, I will go anywhere, do anything to help you, on the honor of a gentleman and a soldier." I had, of course, recommended his wife to give up her rings when the pirates were threatening her in the cabin. The other door opened, another man said, "Now then, in with that carrion. Do you want to keep the judges waiting?" I stepped through the door straight down into the dark. There was a row of spikes in the front of it. I wasn't afraid. 3 men in enormous wigs and ermine robes faced me. 4 in short wigs had their heads together like parrots on a branch. A fat man, bareheaded with a gilt chain round his neck, slipped from behind into a seat beside the highest-placed judge. He was wiping his mouth and munching with his jaws. On each side of the judges, beyond the short-wigged assessors, were chairs full of ladies and gentlemen. They all had their eyes upon me. I saw it all very plainly. I was going to see everything, to keep my eyes open, not to let any chance escape. I wondered why a young girl with blue eyes and pink cheeks tittered and shrugged her shoulders. I did not know what was amusing. What astonished me was the smallness, the dirt, the want of dignity of the room itself. I thought they must be trying a case of my importance there by mistake. Presently I noticed a great gilt anchor above the judges' heads. I wondered why it was there, until I remembered it was an Admiralty court. I thought suddenly, if I had thought to tell my father to go and see if the lion had come in the night. A man was bawling out a number of names. "Peter Plymley, gent, any challenge? Lazarus Cohen, merchant, any challenge?" The turnkey beside me leant with his back against the spikes. He was talking to the man who had called us in. "Lazarus Cohen, West Indian merchant, Lord Well-I'd challenge." The other man said, "SSH. His old dad give me 5 shiners to put him up to a thing if I could," the turnkey said again. I didn't catch his meaning until an old man with a very ragged gown was handing up a book to a row of others in a box so near that I could almost have touched them. Then I realized that the turnkey had been winking to me to challenge the jury. I called out at the highest of the judges. I protest against that jury. It is packed. Half of them at least are West Indian merchants. There was a stir all over the court. I realized then that what had seemed only a mass of stuffs of some sort were human beings all looking at me. The judge I had called to opened a pair of dim eyes upon me, clasped and unclasped his hands, very dry, ancient, wrinkled. The judge on his right called angrily. Nonsense, it is too late. They are being sworn. You should have spoken when the names were read. Underneath his wig was an immensely broad face with glaring yellow eyes. I said, it is scandalous. You want to murder me, how should I know what you do in your courts? I say the jury is packed. The very old judge closed his eyes, opened them again, then gasped out. Silence, we are here to try you. This is a court of law. The turnkey pulled my sleeve under cover of the planking. Treat him civil, he whispered, Lord Justice Stowell of the Hadmiralty. T'other's Baron Garrow of the common law, a beast, him as hanged that kid. You can sass him, it doesn't matter. Lord Stowell waved his hand to the clerk with the ragged gown. The book passed from hand to hand along the faces of the jury, the clerk gabbling all the while. The old judge said suddenly, in an astonishingly deep, majestic voice, Prisoner at the bar, you must understand that we are here to give you an impartial trial, according to the laws of this land. If you desire advice as to the procedure of this court, you can have it. I said, I still protest against that jury. I am an innocent man and... He answered querulously, yes, yes, afterwards, and then creaked, now the indictment. Someone hidden from me by 3 barristers began to read in a loud voice not very easy to follow. I caught. For that the said John Kemp, alias Nichols, alias Nicola L. Escoses, alias El Demonio, alias El Diabolto on the 12th of May last, did feloniously and upon the high seas piratically seize a certain ship called the Victoria. The properties of Hyman Cohen and others, and did steal and take therefrom 630 barrels of coffee of the value of, 101 barrels of coffee of the value of, 94 half kegs, and divers others. I gave an immense sigh. That was it then. I had heard of the Victoria. It was when I was at Horton that the news of her loss reached us. Old MacDonald had sworn. It was the day a Negro called Apollo had taken to the bush. I ought to be able to prove that. Afterwards, one of the judges asked me if I pleaded guilty or not guilty. I began a long wrangle about being John Kemp but not Nicola L. Escoses. I was going to fight every inch of the way. They said, You will have your say afterwards. At present, guilty or not guilty. I refused to plead at all. I was not the man. The third judge woke up and said hurriedly, That is a plea of not guilty. Enter it as such. Then he went to sleep again. The young girl on the bench beside him laughed joyously, and Mr. Baron Garrow nodded round at her, then snapped viciously at me. You don't make your case any better by this sort of foolery. His eyes glared at me like an awakened owl's. I said, I'm fighting for my neck, and you'll have to fight too to get it. The old judge said angrily, Silence, or you will have to be removed. I said, I am fighting for my life. There was a sort of buzz all round the court. Lord Stowell said, Yes, yes. And then, now Mr. King's advocate, I suppose Mr. Alfonso Jervis opens for you. A dusty wig swam up from just below my left hand, almost to a level with the dark. The old judge shut his eyes, with an air of a man who is going a long journey in a postchaise. Mr. Baron Garrow dipped his pen into an invisible ink pot and scratched it on his desk. A long story began to drone from under the wig, an interminable farrago of dull nonsense in a hypochondriacal voice, a long tale about piracy in general, piracy in the times of the Greeks, piracy in the times of William the Conqueror, parata nequissima Eustachio, and thanking God that a case of the sort had not been heard in that court for an immense lapse of years. Below me was an array of wigs, on each side a compressed mass of humanity, squeezed so tight that all the eyeballs seemed to be starting out of the heads towards me. From the wig below, a translation of the florid phrases of the Spanish papers was coming. His very Catholic Majesty, out of his great love for his ancient friend and ally, His Britannic Majesty, did surrender the body of the notorious El Demonio called also. I began to wonder who had composed that precious document, whether it was the Jews de la Primera Instancia, bending his yellow face and slow black eyes above the paper, over there in Havana, or whether it was O'Brien who was dead since the writing. All the while the barrister was droning on. I did not listen because I had heard all that before in the room of the judge of the first instance at Havana. Suddenly appearing behind the backs of the row of gentlefolk on the bench was the pale, thin face of my father. I wondered which of his great friends had got him his seat. He was nodding to me and smiling faintly. I nodded, too, and smiled back. I was going to show them that I was not cowed. The voice of the barrister said, "Lords and gentlemen of the jury, that finishes the Spanish evidence, which was taken on commission on the island of Cuba. We shall produce the officer of H-1000, S. Elephant, to whom he was surrendered by the Spanish authorities at Havana, thus proving the prisoner to be the pirate Nicola, and no other. We come now to the specific instance, Lords and gentlemen, an instance as vile." It was some little time before I had grasped how absolutely the Spanish evidence damned me. It was as if, once I fell into the hands of the English officer on Havana Keys, the identity of Nicola could by no manner of means be shaken from round my neck. The barrister came to the facts. A Kingston ship had been boarded, and there was the old story over again. I seemed to see the Rio Medio schooner rushing towards where I and old Cowper and old Lumsden looked back from the poop to see her come alongside. The strings of brown pirates pour in empty-handed and out-laden. Only in the case of the Victoria there were added the ferocities of the prisoner at the bar, Lords and gentlemen of the jury, a fiend in human shape, as we shall prove with the aid of the most respectable witnesses. The man in the wig sat down, and before I understood what was happening, a fat, rosy man, the Attorney General, whose cheerful gills gave him a grotesque resemblance to a sucking pig, was calling Edward Sadler, and the name blared like sudden fire leaping up all over the court. The Attorney General wagged his gown into a kind of bunch behind his hips, and a man, young, fair, with a reddish beard and a shiny suit of clothes, sprang into a little box facing the jury. He bowed nervously in several directions and laughed gently. Then he looked at me and scowled. The Attorney General cleared his throat pleasantly. "Mr. Edward Sadler, you were, on May 25th, chief mate of the good ship Victoria." The fair man with the beard told his story, the old story of the ship with its cargo of coffee and dyewood, its good passage past the Gran Caymanos, the becalming off the Cuban shore in latitude so-and-so, and the boarding of a black schooner calling itself a Mexican privateer. I could see all that. The prisoner at the bar came alongside in a boat with 17 Spaniards. He said, in a clear, expressionless voice, looking me full in the face. I called out to the old judge, "My lord, I protest. This is perjury. I was not the man, it was Nichols, a Nova Scotian." Mr. Berengarrow roared, "Silence," his face suffused with blood. Old Lord Stowell quavered, "You must respect the procedure." "Am I to hear my life sworn away without a word?" I asked. He drew himself frostily into his robes. "God forbid," he said, "but at the proper time you can cross-examine if you think fit." The Attorney General smiled at the jury box and addressed himself to Sadler, with an air of patience very much tried. "You swear the prisoner is the man?" The fair man turned his sharp eyes upon me. I called, "For God's sake, don't perjure yourself. You are a decent man." "No, I won't swear," he said slowly. "I think he was. He had his face blacked then, of course. When I had sight of him at the Thames Court I thought he was, and seeing the Spanish evidence I don't see where's the room." "The Spanish evidence is part of the plot," I said. The Attorney General snickered. "Go on, Mr. Sadler," he said. "Let us have the rest of the plot unfolded." A juryman laughed suddenly and resumed an abashed sudden silence. Sadler went on to tell the old story. I saw it all as he spoke. Only gaunt, shiny-faced, yellow Nichols was chewing and hitching his trousers in place of my Tomas with his sanguine oaths and jerked gestures, and there was Nichols' wanton, aimless ferocity. He had 2 pistols which he fired twice each, while we were hoisting the studding sails by his order to keep up with the schooner. He fired twice into the crew. One of the men hit died afterwards. Later another vessel, an American, had appeared in the offing, and the pirates had gone in chase of her. He finished, and Lord Stowell moved one of his ancient hands. It was as if a grey lizard had moved on his desk, a little toward me. "Now, prisoner," he said. I drew a deep breath. I thought for a minute that after all there was a little fair play in the game, that I had a decent, fair, blue-eyed man in front of me. He looked hard at me, I hard at him. It was as if we were going to wrestle for a belt. The young girl on the bench had her lips parted and leant forward, her head a little on one side. I said, "You won't swear I was the man, Nicola El Escoses." He looked meditatively into my eyes. It was a duel between us. "I won't swear," he said. "You had your face blacked and didn't wear a beard." A soft growth of hair had come out over my cheeks whilst I lay in prison. I rubbed my hand against it, and thought that he had drawn first blood. "You must not say you," I said. "I swear I was not the man. Did he talk like me?" "Can't say that he did," Sadler answered, moving from one foot to the other. "Had he got eyes like me, or a nose or a mouth?" "Can't say," he answered again. His face was blacked. "Didn't he talk blue nose, in the Nova Scotian way?" "Well, he did," Sadler assented slowly. "But anyone could for a disguise, it's as easy as—" Beside me the turnkey whispered suddenly, "Pull him up, stop his mouth." I said, "Wasn't he an older man? Didn't he look between 40 and 50? "What do you look like?" the chief mate asked. "I'm 24, I answered. "I can prove it." "Well, you look 40 and older," he answered negligently. So did he. His cool, disinterested manner overwhelmed me like the blow of an immense wave. It proved so absolutely that I had parted with all semblance of youth. It was something added to the immense waste of waters between myself and Seraphina, an immense waste of years. I did not ask much of the next witness. Sadler had made me afraid. Septimus Hearn, the master of the Victoria, was a man with eyes as blue and as cold as bits of round blue pebble, a little goat's beard, iron grey, apple-coloured cheeks and small gold earrings in his ears. He had an extraordinarily mournful voice and a retrospective melancholy of manner. He was just such another master of a trader as Captain Lumsden had been, and it was the same story over again, with little different touches, the hard blue eyes gazing far over the top of my head, the gnarled hands moving restlessly on the rim of his hat. Afterwards the prisoner ordered the steward to give us a drink of brandy. A glass was offered me, but I refused to drink it, and he said, "Who is it that refuses to drink a glass of brandy?" He asked me what countryman I was, and if I was an American. There were two others from the unfortunate Victoria, a Thomas Davis boatswain who had had one of Nicola's pistol balls in his hip, and a sort of steward, I have forgotten his name, who had a scar of a cutlass wound on his forehead. It was horrible enough, but what distressed me more was that I could not see what sort of impression I was making. Once the judge, who was generally asleep, woke up and began to scratch furiously with his quill. Once 3 of the assessors, the men in short wigs, began an animated conversation. One man with a thin, dark face laughed noiselessly, showing teeth like a white waterfall. A man in the body of the court on my left had an enormous swelling, blood-red, and looking as if a touch must burst it under his chin. At one time he winked his eyes furiously for a long time on end. It seemed to me that something in the evidence must be affecting all these people. The turnkey beside me said to his mate, "Twig old Justice best making notes in his stud calendar." And suddenly the conviction forced itself upon me that the whole thing, the long weary trial, the evidence, the parade of fairness, was being gone through in a spirit of mockery as a mere formality, that the judges and the assessors, and the man with the goiter took no interest whatever in my case. It was a foregone conclusion. A tiny fair man with pale hair oiled and rather long for those days, and with green and red signet rings on fingers that he was forever running through that hair, came mincingly into the witness box. He held for a long time what seemed to be an amiable conversation with Sir Robert Gifford, a tall, portentous-looking man who had black beetling brows, like tufts of black horsehair sticking in the crannies of a cliff. The conversation went like this. "You are the Hund, Thomas Oldham." "Yes, yes." "You know Kingston, Jamaica, very well." "I was there 4 years, 2 as the secretary to the cabinet of His Grace the Duke of Manchester, 2 as civil secretary to the Admiral on the station." "You saw the prisoner?" "Yes, 3 times." I drew an immense breath. I thought for a moment that they had delivered themselves into my hands. The thing must prove of itself that I had been in Jamaica, not in Rio Medio, through those 2 years. My heart began to thump like a great solemn drum, like Paul's bell when the king died, solemn, insistent, dominating everything. The little man was giving an account of the abominable state of confusion into which the island's trade was thrown by the misdeeds of a pirate called Nicola el Demonio. "I assure you, my lads," he squeaked, turning suddenly to the judges, "the island was wrought up into a pitch of, almost disloyalty, the, planters were clamouring for, separation, and to be sure I trust you'll hang the prisoner, for if you do." Lord Stowell shivered and said suddenly with haste, "Mr. Oldham, address yourself to Sir Robert." I was almost happy. The cloven hoof had peeped so damningly out. The little man bowed briskly to the old judge, asked for a chair, sat himself down and arranged his coat tails. As I was saying, he prattled on. The trouble and the worry that this man caused to His Grace, myself, and Admiral Rowley were inconceivable. You have no idea, you can't conceive. And no wonder, for as it turned out, the island was simply honeycombed by his spies and agents. You have no idea, people who seemed most respectable, people we ourselves had dealings with. He rattled on at immense length, the barrister taking huge pinches of yellow snuff, and smiling genially with the air of a horse trainer, watching a pony go faultlessly through difficult tricks. Every now and then he flicked his whip. Mr. Oldham, you saw the prisoner 3 times. If it does not overtax your memory, pray tell us. And the little creature pranced off in a new direction. Tax my memory? Gad, I like that. You remember a man who has had your blood as near as could be, don't you? I had been looking at him eagerly, but my interest faded away now. It was going to be the old confusing of my identity with Nicola's, and yet I seemed to know the little beggar's falsetto. It was a voice one does not forget. Remember, he squeaked. Gad, gentlemen of the jury, he came as near as possible. You have no idea what a ferocious devil it is. I was wondering why on earth Nichols should have wanted to kill such a little thing, because it was obvious that it must have been Nichols. As near as possible murdered myself and Admiral Rowley and a Mr. Tupnambo, a most enlightened and loyal, inhabitant of the island on the steps of a public inn. I had it then. It was the little man David MacDonald had rolled down the steps with, that night at the Ferry Inn on the Spanish Town Road. He was lying in wait for us with a gang of assassins. I was stabbed on the upper lip, I lost so much blood, had to be invalided, cannot think of horrible episode without shuddering. He had seen me then, and when Ramon, a Spaniard who was afterwards proved to be a spy of El Demonio's, of the prisoner, he was hung since, had driven me from the place of execution after the hanging of the 7 pirates, and he had come into Ramon's store at the moment when Carlos, a piratical devil if ever there was one, the little man protested, had drawn me into the back room, where Don Balthazar and O'Brien and Serafina sat waiting. The men who were employed to watch Ramon, had never seen me leave again, and afterwards a secret tunnel was discovered leading down to the quay. This apparently was the way by which the prisoner used to arrive and quit the island secretly. He finished his evidence in chief, and the beetle-browed, portly barrister sat down. I was not so stupid but what I could see a little even then, how the most innocent events of my past were going to rise up and crush me. But I was certain I could twist him into admitting the goodness of my tale which hadn't yet been told. He knew I had been in Jamaica, and put what construction he liked on it, he would have to admit it. I called out, "Thank God, my turn's come at last." The faces of the Attorney General, the King's Advocate, Sir Robert Gifford, Mr. Laws, Mr. Jervis, of all the 7 counsel that were arrayed to crush me, lengthened into simultaneous grins, varying at the jury box. But I didn't care, I grinned too. I was going to show them. It was as if I flew at the throat of that little man. It seemed to me that I must be able to crush a creature whose malice was as obvious and as nugatory as the green and red rings that he exhibited in his hair every few minutes. He wanted to show the jury that he had rings, that he was a mincing swell, that I hadn't, and that I was a bloody pirate. I said, "You know that during the whole 2 years Nichols was at Rio I was an improver at Horton Pen with the MacDonalds, the agents of my brother-in-law Sir Ralph Rooksby. You must know these things. You were one of the Duke of Manchester's spies. We used to call the Duke's Privy Council that. I certainly know nothing of the sort," he said, folding his hands along the edge of the witness box, as if he had just thought of exhibiting his rings in that manner. He was abominably cool. I said, "You must have heard of me, the Tupnambos knew me." The Tupnambos used to talk of a blackguard with a name like Kemp, who kept himself mighty out of the way in the Vale. "You knew I was on the island, I pinned him down." "You used to come to the island," he corrected. "I've just explained how, but you were not there much or we should have been able to lay hands on you. We wanted to. There was a warrant out after you tried to murder us, but you had been smuggled away by Ramon." I tried again. "You have heard of my brother-in-law, Sir Ralph Rooksby." I wanted to show that, if I hadn't rings, I had relations. "Never heard of the man in my life," he said. "He was the largest land proprietor on the island," I said. "Dessay," he said, "I knew 40 of the largest, mostly sharpers in the boozing kens." He yawned. I said viciously, "It was your place to know the island. You knew Horton Pen, the MacDonalds." The face of jolly old Mrs. Mac came to my mind, the impeccable, Scotch, sober respectability. "Oh, I knew the MacDonalds," he said, "of them. The uncle was a damn rebellious, canting, planting Scotchman. Horton Penn was the center of the separation movement. We could have hung him if we'd wanted to. The nephew was the writer of an odious blackmailing print. He calumniated all the decent, loyal inhabitants. He was an agent of you pirates too. We arrested him, got his papers, know all about your relations with him. I said, that's all nonsense, let us hear. The Attorney General had always said that, what you know of myself. What I know of you, he sniffed, if it's a policewer, was something like this. You came to the island in a mysterious way, gave out that you were an earl's son, and tried to get into the very excellent society of, people like my friends the Tupnambos. But they would not have you, and after that you kept yourself mighty close. No one ever saw you but once or twice, and then it was riding about at night with that hump-backed scoundrel of a blackmailer. You in fact weren't on the island at all, except when you came to spy for the pirates. You used to have long confabulations with that scoundrel Ramon, who kept you posted about the shipping. As for the blackmailer with the humpback David MacDonald, you kept him subsidized his filthy print to foment mutiny and murder among the black fellows, and preach separation. You wanted to tie our hands and prevent our, prosecuting the preventive measures against you. When you found that it was no good, you tried to murder the Admiral and myself, and that very excellent man Tupnambo coming from a ball. After that you were seen encouraging 7 of your, pirate fellows whom we were hanging, and you drove off in haste with your agent Ramon, before we could lay hands on you, and vanished from the island. I didn't lose my grip. I went at him again blindly, as if I were boxing with my eyes full of blood but my teeth set tight. I said, you used to buy things yourself of old Ramon, bought them for the Admiral to load his frigates with, things he sold at Key West. That was one of the lies your scoundrel David MacDonald circulated against us. You bought things, even whilst you were having his store watched. Upon my soul, he said. You used to buy things. I pinned him. He looked suddenly at the King's Advocate, then dropped his eyes. Never bought a thing in my life, he said. I knew the man had. Ramon had told me of his buying for the Admiral more than 300 barrels of damaged coffee for £30. I was in a mad temper. I smashed my hand upon the spikes of the rail in front of me, and although I saw hands move impulsively towards me all over the court, I did not know that my arm was impaled and the blood running down. Perjurer, I shouted, Ramon himself told me. You were mighty thick with Ramon, he said. I let him stand down. I was done. Someone below said harshly, that closes our case, Luds, and the court rustled all over. Old Lord Stowell in front of me shivered a little, looked at the window, and then said, Prisoner at the bar, our procedure has it that if you wish to say anything, you may now address the jury. Afterwards, if you had a counsel, he could call and examine your witnesses, if you have any. It was growing very dark in the court. I began to tell my story. It was so plain, so evident, it shimmered there before me, and yet I knew it was so useless. I remembered that in my cell I had reasoned out that I must be very constrained, very lucid about the opening. On such and such a day I landed at Kingston, to become an improver on the estate of my brother-in-law. He is Sir Ralph Rooksby of Horton Priory in Kent. I did keep cool, I was lucid, I spoke like that. I had my eyes fixed on the face of the young girl upon the bench. I remember it so well. Her eyes were fixed, fascinated upon my hand. I tried to move it and found that it was stuck upon the spike on which I had jammed it. I moved it carelessly away and only felt a little pain as if from a pinprick. But the blood was dripping on to the floor, pat, pat. Later on, a man lit the candles on the judge's desk, and the court looked different. There were deep shadows everywhere, and the illuminated face of Lord Stowell looked grimmer, less kind, more ancient, more impossible to bring a ray of sympathy to. Down below, the barristers of the prosecution leaned back with their arms all folded, and the air of men resting in an interval of cutting down a large tree. The barristers who were merely listeners looked at me from time to time. I heard one say, that man ought to have his hand bound up. I was telling the story of my life, that was all I could do. As for Ramon, how could I know he was in the pay of the pirates, even if he were? I swear I did not know. Everyone on the island had dealings with him, the Admiral himself. That is not calumny. On my honor, the Admiral did have dealings. Some of you have had dealings with forgers, but that does not make you forgers. I warmed to it. I found words. I was telling the story for that young girl. Suddenly I saw the white face of my father peep at me between the head of an old man with an enormous nose, and a stout lady in a brown cloak that had a number of little watchmen's capes. He smiled suddenly and nodded again and again, opened his eyes, shut them, furtively waved a hand. It distracted me, threw me off my balance, my coolness was gone. It was as if something had snapped. After that I remembered very little. I think I may have quoted The Prisoner of Chillon, because he put it into my head. I seemed to be back again in Cuba. Down below me the barristers were talking. The king's advocate pulled out a puce-coloured bandana and waved it abroad preparatorily to blowing his nose. A cloud of the perfume of a West Indian bean went up from it, sweet and warm. I had smelt it last at Rio. The sensation was so strong that I could not tell where I was. The candles made a yellow glow on the judge's desk, but it seemed to be the blaze of light in the cell where Nichols and the Cuban had fenced. I thought I was back in Cuba again. The people in the court disappeared in the deepening shadows. At times I could not speak. Then I would begin again. If there were to be any possibility of saving my life, I had to tell what I had been through, and to tell it vividly. I had to narrate the story of my life, and my whole life came into my mind. It was Serafina who was the essence of my life, who spoke with the voice of all Cuba, of all Spain, of all romance. I began to talk about old Don Balthazar Riego. I began to talk about Manuel del Popolo, of his red shirt, his black eyes, his mandolin. I saw again the light of his fires flicker on the other side of the ravine in front of the cave. And I rammed all that into my story, the story I was telling to that young girl. I knew very well that I was carrying my audience with me. I knew how to do it, I had it in the blood. The old pale, faded, narrow-lidded father who was blinking and nodding at me had been one of the best raconteurs that ever was. I knew how. In the black shadows of the wall of the court I could feel the eyes upon me. I could see the parted lips of the young girl as she leaned further towards me. I knew it because, when one of the barristers below raised his voice, someone hissed SSH from the shadows. And suddenly it came into my head that even if I did save my life by talking about these things, it would be absolutely useless. I could never go back again, never be the boy again, never hear the true voice of the ever-faithful island. What did it matter even if I escaped? Even if I could go back? The sea would be there, the sky, the silent dim hills, the listless surge. But I should never be there, I should be altered for good and all. I should never see the breathless dawn in the pondwater of Havana Harbor, never be there with Serafina close beside me in the little drogher. All that remained was to see this fight through, and then have done with fighting. I remember the intense bitterness of that feeling and the oddity of it all, of the one eye that felt like that, of the other that was raving in front of a lot of open-eyed idiots, 3 old judges and a young girl. And in a queer way, the thoughts of the one eye floated through into the words of the other, that seemed to be waving its hands in its final struggle, a little way in front of me. Look at me, look at what they have made of me, one and the other of them. I was an innocent boy. What am I now? They have taken my life from me, let them finish it how they will. What does it matter to me, what do I care? There was a rustle of motion all round the court. On board Rowley's flagship, the heavy irons had sawed open my wrists. I hadn't been ironed in Newgate, but the things had healed up very little. I happened to look down at my claws of hands with the grime of blood that the dark spikes had caused. What sort of a premium is it that you set on sticking to the right? Is this how you are going to encourage the others like me? What do I care about your death? What's life to me? Let them get their scaffold ready. I have suffered enough to be put out of my misery. God, I have suffered enough with one and another. Look at my hands, I say. Look at my wrists and say if I care any more. I held my ghastly paws high and the candle light shone upon them. Out of the black shadows came shrieks of women and curses. I saw my young girl put her hands over her face and slip slowly, very slowly from her chair, down out of sight. People were staggering in different directions. I had had more to say, but I forgot in my concern for the young girl. The turnkey pulled my sleeve and said, "I say that ain't true, is it? It ain't true." Because he seemed not to want it to have been true, I glowed for a moment with the immense pride of my achievement. I had made them see things. A minute after, I understood how futile it was. I was not a fool even in my then half-mad condition. The real feeling of the place came back upon me, the court of law of it. The king's advocate was whispering to the attorney general. He motioned with his hand, first in my direction, then towards the jury. Then they both laughed and nodded. They knew the ropes too well for me, and there were 7 West India merchants up there who would remember their pockets in a minute. But I didn't care. I had made them see things. Chapter 5. I had shot my bolt and I was going to die. I could see it in the way the king's advocate tossed his head back, fluttered his bands, looked at the jury box and began to play with the seals on his fob. The court had resumed its stillness. A man in some sort of livery passed a square paper to the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor passed it to Lord Stowell, who opened it with a jerking motion of an ancient fashion that impressed me immensely. It was as if I, there at the end of my life, were looking at a man opening a letter of the reign of Queen Anne. The shadows of his ancient, wrinkled face changed as he read, raising his eyebrows and puckering his mouth. He handed the unfolded paper to Mr. Berengario, then with one wrinkled finger beckoned the Attorney General to him. The third judge was still asleep. "What the devil's this?" the turnkey beside me said to his companion. I was in a good deal of pain, and felt sickly that every pulse of my heart throbbed in my mangled hand. The other spat straight in front of him. "Damn if I know," he said. "This cursed business ought to have been over and done with an hour agone. I told Jinx to have my rarebit and noggin down by the gatehouse fire at 5:30, and it's 6 now." They began an interminable argument under their breaths. "It's that wager of Lord March's. Run a mile, walk a mile, eat 5 pounds of mutton, drink 5 pints of claret. No, it ain't. Medmenham coach ain't in yet. Road's too heavy. It is. What else would stop the court at this time of night? It isn't, or justice best be awake and hedging his bets." In a dizzy way, I noted the Attorney General making his way carefully back between the benches to his knot of barristers, and their wigs went all together in a bunch like ears of corn, drawn suddenly into a sheaf. The heads of the other barristers were like unreaped ears. A man with a face like a weasel's called to a man with a face like a devil's. He was leaving the court, something about an ambassador. The other stopped, turned, and deposited his bag again. I heard the deep voice of Sir Robert Gifford say, "What? Never. Too infamous." And then the interest and the light seemed to flicker out together. I could hardly see. Voices called out to each other, harsh, dry, as if their owners had breathed nothing but dust for years and years. One loud one barked, "You can't hear him, Luds in Rex 5, Marsupenstein." A lot began calling all together, "Ah, but that was different, Mr. Attorney. You couldn't subpoena him, he being in the position of extra liege commune, but if he offers a statement." The candles seemed to be waving deliberately like elm tops in a high wind. Someone called, "Clerk, fetch me volume 13. I think we shall find there. You recollect the case of Hildesheim 5. Row, wasn't it Hildegorlen and another Lud? I tried the case myself, the Prussian plenipotentiary." I wanted to call out to them that it was not worthwhile to try their dry throats any more, that having shot my bolt I gave in, but I could not think of any words, I was so tired. I didn't sleep at all last night, I found myself saying to myself. The sleeping judge woke up suddenly and snarled, "Why in heaven's name don't we get on? We shall be all night. Let him call the second name on the list. We can take the Spanish ambassador when you have settled. For my part, think we ought to hear him." Lord Stowell said suddenly, "Prisoner at the bar, some gentlemen have volunteered statements on your behalf. If you wish it, they can be called." I didn't answer. I did not understand. I wanted to tell him I did not care, because the Lion was posted as overdue and Seraphina was drowned. The court seemed to be moving slowly up and down in front of me like the deck of a ship. I thought I was bound again, and on the sofa in the gorgeous cabin of the Madre de Dios, someone seemed to be calling, "Prisoner at the bar, prisoner at the bar." It was as if the candles had been lit in front of the Madonna with the pink child, only she had a gilt anchor instead of the spiky gilt glory above her head. Somebody was saying, "Hello there, hold up, here, bring a chair," and there were arms around me. Afterwards I sat down. A very old judge's voice said something rather kindly, I thought. I knew it was the very old judge, because he was called the star of Cuban law. Someone would be bending over me soon with a lanthorn, and I should be wiping the flour out of my eyes and blinking at the red velvet and gilding of the cabin ceiling. In a minute Carlos and Castro would come. Or was it O'Brien who would come? No, O'Brien was dead, stabbed with a knife in his neck. The blood was still sticky between my first and second fingers. I could feel it. I ought to have been allowed to wash my hands before I was tried, or was it before I spoke to the Admiral? One would not speak to a man with hands like that. A loud, high-pitched voice called from up in the air, "I will give any of you gentlemen of the robe down there £50 to conduct the remainder of the case for him. I am the prisoner's father." My father's voice broke the spell. I was in the court, the candles were still burning, all the faces lit up or in the shadow were bunched together in little groups, hands waved. The barrister whose face was like the devil's under his wig held in his hands the paper that had been handed to Lord Stowell. My father was talking to him from the bench. The barrister, tall, his robes old and ragged, silhouetted against the light, glanced down the paper, fluttered it in his hand, nodded to my father, and began a grotesque nasal drawl. Luds, I will conduct the case for the prisoner, if your lordships will bear with me a little. He obviously can't call his own witnesses. If he has been treated as he says, it has been one of the most abominable. Old Lord Stowell said, CH'd, Mr. Walker, you know you must not make a speech for the prisoner. Call your witness. It is all that is needed." I wondered what he meant by that. The barrister was calling a man of the name of Williams. I seemed to know the name. I seemed to know the man too. Owen Williams, master of the ship Lion, Coffee and Dye Wood, just come in under a jury rig, had been dismasted and afterwards becalmed, heard of this trial from the pilot in Gravesend, had taken postchaises. I only heard snatches of his answers. On the 25th of August last I was close in with the Cuban coast. The mate, Sebright, got boiling water for them, afterwards a heavy fog, they boarded us in many boats. He was giving all the old evidence over again, fastening another stone around my neck, but suddenly he said, "This gentleman came alongside in a leaky dinghy, a dead shot. He saved all our lives." His bullet head, the stare of his round blue eyes seemed to draw me out of a delirium. I called out, "Williams, for God's sake, Williams, where is Seraphina? Did she come with you?" There was an immense roaring in my head and the ushers were shouting, "Silence, silence," I called out again. Williams was smiling idiotically, then he shook his head and put his finger to his mouth to warn me to keep silence. I only noted the shake of the head. Seraphina had not come. The Havana people must have taken her. It was all over with me. The roaring noise made me think that I was on a beach by the sea, with the smugglers, perhaps, at night down in Kent. The silence that fell upon the court was like the silence of a grave. Then someone began to speak in measured, portentous Spanish that seemed a memory of the past. "I, the ambassador of His Catholic Majesty, being here upon my honor and on my oath, demand the resurrender of this gentleman, whose courage equals his innocence. Documents which have just reached my hands establish clearly the mistake of which he is the victim. The functionary who is called alcalde of the castle at Havana confused the men. Nicola L. Escos is escaped, having murdered the judge whose place it was to identify. I demand that the prisoner be set at liberty." A long time after a harsh voice said, "Your Excellency, we retire of course from the prosecution." A different one directed, "Gentlemen of the jury, you will return a verdict of not guilty." Down below they were cheering uproariously because my life was saved, but it was I that had to face my saved life. I sat there, my head bowed into my hands. The old judge was speaking to me in a tone of lofty compassion. "You have suffered much, as it seems, but suffering is the lot of us men. Rejoice now that your character is cleared, that here in this public place you have received the verdict of your countrymen that restores you to the liberties of our country and the affection of your kindred. I rejoice with you who am a very old man, at the end of my life." It was rather tremendous, his deep voice, his weighted words. Suffering is the lot of us men. The formidable legal array, the great powers of a nation had stood up to teach me that, and they had taught me that suffering is the lot of us men. It takes long enough to realize that someone is dead at a distance. I had done that. But how long it needs to know that the life of your heart has come back from the dead. For years afterwards I could not bear to have her out of my sight. Of our first meeting in London, all I remember is a speechlessness that was like the odd hesitation of our overtried souls before the greatness of a change from the verge of despair to the opening of a supreme joy. The whole world, the whole of life with her return had changed all around me. It enveloped me, it enfolded me so lightly as not to be felt, so suddenly as not to be believed in, so completely that that whole meeting was an embrace, so softly that at last it lapsed into a sense of rest that was like the fall of a beneficent and welcome death. For suffering is the lot of man, but not inevitable failure or worthless despair which is without end. Suffering, the mark of manhood, which bears within its pain a hope of felicity like a jewel set in iron. Her first words were, "You broke our compact, you went away from me whilst I was sleeping." Only the deepness of her reproach revealed the depth of her love, and the suffering she too had endured to reach a union that was to be without end, and to forgive. And looking back we see romance, that subtle thing that is mirage, that is life. It is the goodness of the years we have lived through, of the old time when we did this or that, when we dwelt here or there. Looking back it seems a wonderful enough thing that I who am this, and she who is that, commencing so far away a life that after such sufferings born together and apart, ended so tranquilly there in a world so stable, that she and I should have passed through so much good chance and evil chance, sad hours and joyful, all lived down and swept away into the little heap of dust that is life. That too is romance. The end.